You ever make a decision so dumb, so obviously terrible that even while you're doing it, some deep part of your brain is screaming at you to stop? That was me when I took the night shift job at the Skinwalker Motel. The ad didn't say Skinwalker Motel, of course. It just said, hiring, night clerk, quiet motel outside Tuba City, Arizona, $30 per hour, meals included. I was broke, couch surfing, and 2 months behind on everything. The pay sounded unreal, but I needed it. So I emailed the guy. He replied within minutes. Can you start tonight? That should have been the first red flag, but I ignored it. Desperation is a hell of a drug. I took a bus from Flagstaff to a dusty stop in the middle of nowhere. The motel sat alone in the desert, surrounded by sagebrush and silence, the kind of place that looked abandoned from the road. Shingles missing, sign flickering. The air had that dry, electric weight, like something waiting to strike. The sun was already bleeding into the horizon when I got off. The front office door creaked open before I even knocked. A man stood inside. Tall, graybeard, red flannel shirt buttoned up. His eyes looked like they hadn't seen sleep in a decade. You Jake? Yeah. He didn't introduce himself, just handed me a laminated sheet and a metal keychain with the number 0 on it. The key was old and tarnished, like it had been dug up rather than cut. You read those rules, he said. Don't break them, not even a little. I looked down at the sheet. There were 10 rules printed in bold type. The sheet he handed me was laminated, but the corners were melted like someone had tried to set it on fire before thinking better of it. 10 rules, simple, short, and somehow more terrifying because of it. The first one? Only check-in guests between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m., no exceptions. I wasn't told what would happen if someone showed up at 11:01, just that I'd better not let them in. Rule 2. Room 3 is always occupied. I wasn't to knock on the door, wasn't to clean it, and sure as hell wasn't to talk about it. I didn't even know where room 3 was yet, and already I hated it. Rule 3 made my stomach drop. If a guest came with no luggage, they were to be given room 5. Then I was to lock the door behind them, from the outside. There was a second key specifically for that. Rule 4. At 12:17 a.m., turn off all the front-facing lights for exactly 5 minutes. No explanation was given, not even a trust me, just do it. Lights off, count. Rule 5. If I heard knocking from the supply closet, I was never, under any circumstances, to open it. No matter what I heard, whispers, cries, or begging, I wasn't allowed to open that door. Rule 6 was deceptively simple. Keep the lobby TV on channel 63. Didn't matter if it was playing static or full-blown demonic infomercials, channel 63 stayed on. Rule 7 gave me chills. If I saw a dog in the parking lot, I had to close my eyes. Didn't matter if it looked friendly, didn't matter if it barked or begged. Eyes shut, wait until it's gone. Rule 8. Some guests might try to bribe me for information. About what, I didn't know. But I was told not to answer, not even a single word. Rule 9 felt like some kind of ritual. At 3:33 a.m., I had to drink all the coffee in the black thermos under the desk. All of it. Didn't matter how it tasted, didn't matter if it was still warm. And finally, Rule 10. If a man named Frank showed up, I was to give him the master key and say, "Welcome back." I laughed, out loud. A dry, nervous thing. You serious with this? He didn't smile. You break one rule, Jake, and you're gone. That's if you're lucky. He pointed to the metal door behind the front desk. Your room's through there. Shift starts at 8. Don't be late. The room was basic. Cot, mini fridge, small TV, no windows. A single bulb buzzed overhead with a migraine's rhythm. I lay down, closed my eyes, and told myself it was a weird old man with a creepypasta sense of humor. I woke up at 7:55 p.m., my heart already thumping like it knew something I didn't. The front office felt different at night. The shadows seemed thicker, more confident. The lights buzzed a little louder, and the silence outside felt anticipatory. At 8 p.m. on the dot, the bell above the door jingled, but instead of dread, I felt a strange calm, almost like muscle memory kicking in. I straightened up, ready to act like this was any other job. The next few hours passed in a strange rhythm. I checked in 2 guests, an elderly couple with heavy luggage and a young man clearly passing through, both normal, both thankfully unaware of the rule sheet under the counter. I handed out keys, smiled, and even managed a bit of small talk. In between, I wandered the motel lobby, trying to memorize the layout. There was a vending machine tucked near the side hallway. An old rotary phone mounted to the wall, though I wasn't sure it worked. The carpet was frayed near room 3, and the door there looked untouched, like no one had opened it in years, yet it still carried the weight of presence. I glanced at the clock. Still early. The television buzzed with soft static, as per Rule 6. My eyes drifted to the parking lot. Nothing out of place. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe the rules were just old ghost stories to keep new hires from getting lazy. That comfort lasted right up until the bell jingled again, and he walked in. My breath hitched a little. I had expected silence, maybe even hoped for it. But when that bell rang, it felt like a judge's gavel. The man who walked in looked normal. Mid-40s maybe. Clean shirt, dusty boots, no luggage. But there was something in the way he moved, deliberate, unnatural, like he was trying to remember how people walk. "One night," he said, and his voice was flat, completely void of emotion, like he was reciting something he'd memorized but didn't understand. Not a hint of impatience or curiosity, just hollow. I hesitated, long enough for the silence to stretch thin. My mouth had gone dry, like my throat had forgotten how to swallow. Rule 3 echoed in my brain like a warning siren, but even then, part of me hoped I'd misunderstood. "Room 5, I managed, steadying my voice by sheer will. I handed him the key, and he took it with fingers that were just a touch too stiff. As we walked the dim hallway together, I caught myself stealing glances. He didn't speak, didn't blink. His eyes looked like glass, smooth and unfeeling. But behind that surface was a depth I couldn't quite explain. They didn't reflect the hallway or anything tangible, instead catching a light from somewhere else, somewhere wrong. Something that looked back at me, not through me. At me, focused, cold, intent. His face was pulled taut, as if it had been worn too long, the skin adapting to a shape it wasn't meant to hold. Under the weak glow of the wall sconce, I caught something twitching beneath the surface of his cheek, like a muscle trying to move the wrong way, like it wasn't used to being there. I opened room 5. He stepped inside like he'd done it 100 times. I shut the door and locked it from the outside. The click echoed louder than it should have. Back at the front desk, I collapsed into the chair, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I tried to focus on something, anything. The clock, the rule sheet, my own breathing. What the hell kind of motel had rules like these? What kind of place gave you a manual for surviving the night? This felt less like employment and more like a dare, disguised as a paycheck wrapped in dust and unease a paycheck. The room felt smaller than before, the air thicker. Every creak in the walls, every pop of the old pipes sent my nerves on high alert. I wasn't ready to deal with any of it. I was barely ready to sit still. I reread the rules again and again, each time finding something I had missed, like my brain was trying to decode some puzzle I didn't even know I was playing. My finger hovered over Rule 3. The words blurred slightly. I rubbed my eyes and blinked hard. Outside, the desert was unnervingly still. The air was still, untouched by even a breeze. Not a single insect chirped or fluttered. A complete dense silence pressed in from all sides, like the whole world was holding its breath. And I was the only idiot dumb enough to exhale. The room felt like it was watching me. The shadows leaned in closer. The television on channel 63 crackled softly, static humming like a low whisper. I didn't dare change the channel. That was Rule 6. It stayed on. My eyes wandered to the hallway, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a shadow move past room 3. Just a flicker, but enough to make me freeze. I didn't know what was in that room. I didn't want to. I tried to remind myself I needed this job, but that thought rang hollow. What I needed was to not be in that motel with its scorched rules and its empty desert and its guests who wore skin like it didn't belong to them. And the worst part? The night had only just begun. 12:17 a.m. I killed the front lights. Darkness swallowed everything. The desert outside was a pitch, no cars, no bugs, not even wind. Then came the footsteps. The sound of movement slithered around the office, slow and heavy, with a wet drag that defied explanation. It wasn't the gait of a person, nor the rhythm of any animal I'd ever heard. It scraped and slid in irregular patterns, each step thick with weight and hesitation, as though whatever was out there didn't quite know how to move in a body not meant for this world. They circled the office. I could hear their breath fogging up the glass. One paused right behind the front window. My fingers tightened around the desk. Something scraped the door. Fingernail? Claw? I wasn't going to find out. I closed my eyes and started counting seconds. I don't know why. Just instinct. If I kept count, maybe I could control it. 121, 122. When I reached 300, I flipped the lights back on. Nothing there, except for a single muddy footprint in the shape of a hoof. My breath caught. My first thought was that it had to be a prank, maybe an old boot with a carved sole. But as I stared closer, I realized the weight distribution was wrong. The edges of the print were sunk deep into the carpet, like whatever was left had mass, like it had been real. I crouched beside it, my heart hammering in my chest. The shape was unmistakable. Neither a shoe nor a paw, a hoof, but twisted, asymmetrical. Something that had never belonged to any animal in this world. My eyes scanned the room, slowly, every shadow now suspect. I could hear my pulse in my ears and feel my skin tighten over my bones. I tried to stand, but my knees resisted, like they knew something I didn't. I kept staring at the footprint as if it would change, as if it would offer an explanation. It didn't. What had been outside the door? What had tried to get in? And more importantly, had it left? I backed away slowly, never turning my back to that print. I needed to know more, needed to understand the rules, fully understand them. The rules were not warnings, they were survival instructions. And on the floor next to it, my rule sheet. Half burned, smoking, like someone had tried to light it with a match. I leaned over and picked it up. The laminate was warped now, the edges curled like they'd been dipped in acid. My hand shook, but I held onto it like it was a lifeline. I sat the rest of the night behind that desk, eyes on the door, ears twitching at every creak. At 3:33 a.m., I remembered Rule 9. I reached under the desk, pulled out the black thermos, and unscrewed the lid. The smell hit me first, burnt and sour like stale battery acid mixed with rust. I hesitated, staring into the dark liquid. What kind of rule was this? Drink old coffee in the middle of the night? Out here? In this place? It made no sense. Maybe none of the rules did. Still, I raised it to my lips. The first sip was revolting, sharp, and bitter with a metallic aftertaste that clung to the back of my throat. It didn't go down easy. Every swallow made my stomach lurch, but I kept drinking, because the rule said I had to. By the time I finished the last drop, my tongue felt numb and my chest had started to flutter. My heart picked up speed like someone had flipped a switch. A beat, then two, too fast, too hard. Was I panicking? Maybe. Or maybe it was the coffee, doing something it wasn't supposed to do. I pressed a palm to my chest and exhaled slowly, trying to settle my nerves. The pounding didn't stop. Great, I muttered to myself. As if fear wasn't enough, now I've got caffeine-induced heart failure. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the coffee. It was the room, the motel, the eyes I felt watching me even when the halls were empty. When the sun finally bled across the desert, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I'd survived something I didn't understand, and the worst part was the silence from room 5, heavier than the darkness outside and far more deliberate. A silence that long, that patient doesn't feel like emptiness. It feels like waiting. I wasn't sure if I'd last another night, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever this place was, it was more than a motel. It was a trap dressed up in vacancy signs and desert dust. And I had just checked in. The second night didn't wait. It didn't ease in. It hit hard like a door slammed shut behind me and locked itself from the other side. I woke again at 7:55 p.m. Like the night before, no alarm or sound, only that same internal jolt, like my body knew it was time, as if something had synced itself to me. I pulled on my shirt, the one from yesterday, the one that still carried the smell of scorched laminate and cold sweat. My fingers hesitated at the doorknob. I told myself to breathe, to be calm, to act normal. But there's no acting normal when you're stepping back into something that doesn't want you to leave. The front office looked the same, but I didn't. I could feel how much one night had changed me. The light felt off, too bright in some places and too dim in others. My skin itched like the air was made of static. At 8:03 p.m. the bell jingled. A guest arrived, an older woman in a brown jacket with a dented suitcase. Her smile was tired, her voice soft, and she didn't seem bothered by anything. I checked her in and gave her room 7. As she walked away, I couldn't help but stare. Why would anyone choose to stay here? This wasn't the kind of motel you stumbled upon. It felt like the place people ended up at because something else had already gone wrong. I thought about my situation. I was here because I was broke, desperate, and cornered. If I had any other option, I'd never set foot in this building. But here I was, stuck. Somehow she seemed completely at peace. I wasn't sure if I envied that calm or feared what it meant. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Maybe she was the kind of person this place attracted, quiet, resigned, drifting toward whatever waited in the dark. It should have made me feel better. It didn't. The rule sheet was still there, curled slightly at the edges where the laminate had burned. I glanced at it again. I didn't need to, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like some small, gnawing thought had latched onto the back of my brain and refused to let go. My eyes drifted to that half-melted corner where something used to be, something that had been deliberately erased. I leaned in and flipped the page over. My breath hitched. There, almost hidden beneath the plastic, was a scrawl. A messy black ink sentence warped by heat but still fighting to be read. Rule 11. If someone gives you something from their room, don't keep it. Return it or burn it. And beneath that, smaller and shakier, they bond through memories. They can only reclaim what they gave. I stared at those words until they blurred. My stomach turned with a kind of hollow unease, like I was reading someone's dying confession. Who had written this? And why had they gone so far as to melt the laminate to cover it up? It didn't feel like a prank. It felt like a final cry, a desperate mark left behind by someone who had seen too much and didn't survive it. I could almost picture them scribbling that line in a panic, knowing no one would believe them, hoping someone might. That kind of fear doesn't fade away. It sticks. It grows like mold in the corners of your mind. I caught myself gripping the edge of the desk, knuckles white. Was this how it started? The paranoia creeping in? I had mocked the idea yesterday, brushing off the noises I'd heard when the lights went out. The shuffling, the soft scratching, things I tried to tell myself were just pipes, wind, the natural creaks of a dying building. But deep down, I had heard something. I had ignored it, dismissed it as imagination. And now I was beginning to realize that denial was just the first symptom. Thinking the rules were superstition. But now, something was shifting inside me. I could feel it. The questions, the weight of every glance, every whisper of wind against the window. Maybe this place didn't just hide monsters outside, it planted them inside you. A chill rolled down my spine and my hand trembled slightly as I slid the sheet back under the desk. My heartbeat wasn't driven by fear, it was rehearsing, as if my body was preparing itself for something inevitable, something coming whether I was ready or not. And I wasn't ready, not even close. At 10:15 p.m., I stepped out to smoke. I didn't smoke before this job. Now it felt like the only thing that grounded me. The desert night was still and cold. Sagebrush rustled like dry bones under the sand. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the lot, Where the sodium lamp buzzed faintly stood a dog, mid-sized, short-haired, almost statue still. Its head tilted in that eerie, deliberate way animals sometimes do when they're mimicking curiosity. It wasn't curiosity. It was a routine, something rehearsed and deliberate, like it was waiting for me to react, like it was waiting for a cue. I froze mid-flick with the lighter. Rule 7 echoed in my head with the weight of a warning carved into stone. I turned sharply toward the wall, shut my eyes tight, and tried to push away the pressure blooming in my chest. The dog barked, a short, clipped sound. Then it whimpered, almost pathetically. Then came the growl, low, guttered, dragging against my nerves like a serrated blade. I clenched my eyes harder, my body locking up with the primal need to turn and check. I knew better. I'd read the rule. Still, instinct clawed at me. The silence stretched. My breath caught. Then a voice, almost too close to my ear, broke through. "Jake, please. It's cold. I'm scared. It's me. Open your eyes." It wasn't the words that chilled me. It was the voice. It was mine. A perfect copy, hollowed out and trembling. I bit down on my knuckles hard enough to taste blood. The voice started crying, mimicking my cry, then laughing, then screaming. It flipped through tones like a skipping record of my worst nightmares. It wasn't trying to sound real. It was trying to sound familiar. Then everything stopped. There was no fade, no warning. A hard, unnerving silence that seemed to still the air itself. Even the wind, which had been whispering through the desert moments before, held its breath. My whole body tensed. The sound vacuum was so complete it made my ears ring. I cracked one eye open, barely daring to let in a sliver of vision. The dog was gone. In its place stood a man. He didn't move, just stood there in the exact same spot beneath the flickering light, now dead. His silhouette was sharp against the night, arms stiff, posture too symmetrical, too still to be natural. His face was cloaked in shadow, but I didn't need to see it. I could feel his eyes, like nails driven into the glass between us. They pinned me there. He didn't knock. He didn't call out, just stared. And the longer he stood, the more I realized something wasn't right about the shape of him, like a mannequin posed by someone who didn't understand how human bodies bend. Seconds became minutes. Minutes dragged into hours. I sat frozen, sweat cold on my back, heartbeat a metronome of dread. The clock behind the desk read 12:17 a.m. My breath caught. That was the time, the one from the rule sheet. The one where the lights had to be turned off. But the man was still there, still staring, still mine, and not mine. I hesitated, and then I didn't turn off the lights. I wanted to see him. I needed to know. But the moment passed, and everything shifted. His expression changed, something subtle but unmistakable. His mouth flattened into a hard line. The skin beneath his eyes grew tense, the whites now showing wide and unblinking. He wasn't just watching. He was angry. And then, it started. A pressure behind my eyes, dull at first, then tightening, twisting, like invisible hands pressing into my skull. My temples throbbed, my jaw clenched. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my fingers went numb. I panicked. My hand shot out and flipped the switch. The lights died. And from somewhere deep in the motel, behind walls or under floors, came a sound so unnatural it scraped the air raw, a high-pitched, gargling shriek. Like metal being torn and a scream forced through water, it came from everywhere and nowhere. Something had been disturbed, and it was angry. At 3:33 a.m., my alarm buzzed low and sharp. I already knew what it meant. The rule about the coffee, the one I thought was ridiculous the first night. Now it felt like a ritual that might hold something back, like a line drawn in the sand against the darkness. I got up, legs weak, and reached under the counter where the thermos always waited, fresh, full, steaming hot. I hadn't made it. I never had. But it was always there at 3:33, like clockwork. My fingers shook as I reached for it. I knocked it once against the counter, nearly spilling it all. The metal burned against my palms, but I clung to it like it was the only solid thing in the room. I brought it to my lips, hands trembling uncontrollably. The first sip scalded my tongue. The second poured down my chin. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I gulped it down in sloppy, desperate mouthfuls, coffee sloshing over my hands and dripping onto my shirt. My heart began hammering in my chest. It wasn't only the caffeine, it was terror itself, steeped into every gulp, crawling through my veins. This was the only protection I had, a bitter, burning metal of dread disguised as routine, and I drank every last drop. When the coffee was finally ready, I grabbed the thermos with both hands. It burned against my skin, but I didn't care. I brought it to my lips and drank, not in sips, in desperate, messy gulps. Hot liquid spilled down my chin, seared my tongue, and soaked my shirt. My eyes watered from the bitterness, and still I drank. It was awful, sour, metallic, overbrewed. My heart pounded faster with every swallow, but I forced it down. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought, if I stop now, something gets through. Something takes the gap. When I finished, the thermos clattered onto the desk, nearly toppling. I pressed my palms into my thighs to stop them from shaking. My heart was racing. It wasn't only the caffeine, it was fear itself, laced through every heartbeat. I was trying to drown in it. And what terrified me most? Even with the sun shining on my face, I could still feel the weight of his stare pressing against my skull like fingerprints scorched into memory. I didn't move the rest of the night. I sat at the desk, knees to my chest, a blanket around my shoulders. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I felt his stare through the wall. The corners of his mouth lifted, just a little, enough to let me know he knew I was still awake. At dawn, he vanished. He didn't walk away or drive off. He simply vanished. Simply gone. Like the light had erased him. It didn't erase the image that burned into my head. His eyes. They were mine. Now, they were inside my dreams. I didn't sleep when my shift ended. I lay on the motel bed in my room, staring at the ceiling. My reflection in the bathroom mirror felt unfamiliar, like it was studying me more than copying. When I blinked, I swore it didn't blink with me. My eyes stung, gritty and red. The whites were splotched with little red veins I didn't remember seeing before. It felt like something had been staring back at me all night and left a residue. I showered, but the water didn't make me feel clean. My skin felt filmy, like I'd brought something invisible back with me, something I couldn't scrub off. All day I tried to distract myself. I walked into town, drank coffee I couldn't taste, bought a pack of smokes from a gas station and made small talk with the cashier. But behind every pair of eyes I met, I kept searching, wondering if they were looking at me or through me. By the time the sun began to fall, my chest was tight. The light shifted again, unnatural, and stretched like the shadows were waiting for permission to move. At 7:55 p.m., my eyes opened before I realized I'd even lain down. A new night was beginning, and I knew it wouldn't let me forget what I saw. The third night began like a breath being held. I woke at 7:55 p.m. with dry eyes and the weight of something imagined pressing down on my chest. No dreams, no clarity, just a thick layer of silence stuck to the walls around me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands for a long time before getting dressed. I skipped the mirror. I didn't need to see what was different. The air outside my room was warmer than usual, the kind of warmth that sticks to your clothes and follows you like a second skin. The lobby looked untouched, clean, but too clean, like someone had spent hours scrubbing away evidence of something they couldn't explain. At 8:04 p.m. the bell rang. A man stood at the entrance alone, sharply dressed in a gray suit with dusty shoes. His eyes were strange in how still they were. He arrived without luggage. "Room for one," he said. "Reservation?" "Number. But I've been here before." Something was unsettling about how casually he said it. I found myself wondering what exactly he meant by that. Had he stayed here before? If so, why would he ever come back? I was here because I had no choice, but no one returned to this place willingly, not unless they were searching for something they shouldn't find. He glanced over my shoulder at the lobby TV, which hissed static on channel 63. I followed his gaze instinctively. "Do you ever see anything on that screen?" he asked. I didn't respond right away. That question weighted it, like he knew something I didn't. "No," I finally said. He tilted his head slightly, then smiled. "Not yet, then." That answer stuck with me. What exactly did he expect me to see? I wondered if the static on that channel was hiding something only visible to those who had already lost too much sleep. The idea that I might eventually see something there, something waiting, unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I reached under the desk and slid him the key to room 5. As he took it, I walked around the desk and accompanied him down the hallway. He didn't say a word and didn't look at me, only moved with that same unnerving calm. When we reached room 5, I unlocked the door. He stepped inside, not glancing around, not even blinking. He just walked to the center of the room and stood there, motionless. I watched him for a moment longer, then slowly closed the door and turned the lock behind him. That was the rule. No luggage meant room 5. And once they were in, the door stayed shut. The TV popped. Just once. A loud snap that startled me more than it should have. I turned back toward it and stared, narrowing my eyes, trying to see something, anything that might explain what the man meant. Static hissed steadily, unchanged. I leaned in, watching, the flickers for patterns, shadows, and a face hidden beneath the noise. Nothing. Just a field of snow and my distorted reflection warping like heat rising from asphalt. I waited, tense, eyes straining for any flicker of meaning. When nothing came, I leaned back slowly and thought, maybe he's right. Not yet, at least. At 9:30 p.m., I looked up and saw a man standing near the counter. He was already inside, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed directly on me. I didn't recognize him. His face was ordinary, maybe too ordinary. Brown jacket, jeans, and a tired look in his eyes. He stepped forward and set a key on the counter. Room 4. "I think you checked me in earlier," he said. I stared at the key. My name wasn't on the log. I didn't remember him walking in, didn't remember handing him that key. But the number was written in my handwriting. "Must have been busy," I muttered. He leaned on the counter and looked around slowly like he was trying to decide if we were alone. "You ever get the feeling this place has a memory?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, pretending like it wasn't a serious question. "I don't know. Just weird vibe. Like the walls have seen more than they should." I didn't answer. His gaze returned to me, more direct now. "How long have you been working here?" "Not long." "You probably hear a lot of strange things, huh? People talk, leave stuff behind, ask odd questions." Again, I stayed silent. I felt Rule 8 start to tighten in my chest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip, thick with bills. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble. Just curious. Places like this don't exist for no reason. So what's the deal? What's really going on here?" I forced myself to stay still. Part of me wanted to speak, to ask him what he knew, to beg for some kind of explanation. Maybe he could help. Maybe he already understood more than I did. But the weight of Rule 8 pressed down harder than my doubt. "I don't know anything." He held my eyes for a long time, then slowly set the money clip on the counter. "This says you might." My chest tightened. I hadn't seen that much money in one place in months. Rent, food, the last mechanic bill. This could make those problems vanish, at least for a while. But what if this was a test? What if someone was watching, someone who wanted to know if I'd break the rules? If I took it, I might lose the only job keeping me afloat. And then what? I'd be broke and hunted. I'm sure I don't. He let out a long breath through his nose and gave a small smile. "Didn't think you'd talk, but I had to try." He slid a business card across the counter instead. "If you ever change your mind or something doesn't sit right, call me." I looked down. His name and number were printed neatly. No company, no logo, just information and implication. Then he turned and left, footsteps measured, shoulders a little too square, as if he was trying not to look back. The door creaked open again. A young man stepped inside. He was unusually clean and uncomfortably polite. His clothes were pressed, hands folded in front of him like a student waiting for permission to speak. Something about his smile felt practiced, his demeanor unsettling in its precision. "Checking in?" I asked. He nodded but didn't say his name. When I asked for it, his reply was mumbled, almost as if he was testing how little he could say and still be understood. "Payment?" He blinked once, tilted his head, and gave a half shrug. "Already handled." Each of his sentences ended like he was listening for a cue, waiting to be told his next line. Short, clipped responses, no effort to clarify. He stepped forward, reached into his pocket, and extended something to me, a medallion. Black, smooth, strangely warm. I began. But he pressed it into my palm, fingers curling around mine, holding it shut for a moment longer than necessary. He didn't speak again, just smiled, turned, and walked away. I stood there, medallion in hand, skin tingling. I stared after him as he vanished down the hall. Then the headache started, a tight band across my forehead that pulsed with every flicker of the lobby light. Déjà vu hit me next. Images and sensations that didn't belong to any memory I could place. Shadows on ceilings, wet footsteps in reverse, voices humming inside old radios. I shook my head, gritted my teeth, and dropped the medallion onto the counter. Except, it didn't drop. My hand opened, but the object clung to my skin. It didn't feel stuck. It felt like it was part of me, as if my skin had grown around it while I wasn't looking. Panicking, I returned to the back office and tore open the binder. I needed the rules. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe this had happened before. Rule 11. It flickered through my thoughts. No accepting gifts. But what was I supposed to do? He forced it into my hand. I hadn't asked for it, hadn't agreed to take it. He pressed it on me like it had a purpose of its own. Still, the rules didn't care about intentions, just results. There was nothing else listed. No guidelines for objects like this, no instructions for cursed jewelry, only silence where answers should have been. I grabbed my lighter. Just as the flame flared up, I glanced toward the lobby window and froze. The young man stood outside, barely visible behind the glass, hands pressed against the pane. His eyes were wide now, pleading, desperate. His mouth moved, forming silent words I couldn't hear. Behind him, shadows rippled along the motel's walls. They weren't reflections or tricks of the light. Shapes moving against the surface like they were crawling underneath the paint. They were getting closer. I didn't hesitate. I gritted my teeth and clawed at the medallion, trying to tear it from my palm. It felt fused to my skin, a part of me that wasn't supposed to be there. With a forceful jerk, it finally peeled away, leaving my fingers trembling and damp with sweat. The fear built in my hands and crawled up my spine, telling me that if I didn't get rid of it now, those shadows would come for me next. I threw the medallion into the trash can, snatched the lighter, and sparked the flame. The second the fire touched it, a searing hiss shot through the room like the air itself was exhaling in relief. The pressure lifted. Like a held breath finally released, the air expanded, and everything felt momentarily weightless. I looked up. The young man was still there, but only for a moment. His outline wavered, colors bleeding into the air around him. Bit by bit, his features softened and dissolved. His eyes were the last to go, wide and finally at peace, before even they evaporated like mist. By the time I blinked, there was nothing left. Just space where he'd stood like the air had swallowed him whole, like he had never existed at all. And somehow, that felt like the point. But the night wasn't done with me yet. Hours passed in a haze. I sat there, numb, waiting for the next rule to drag me back into motion. My thoughts spiraled. Was I losing it? Was this motel peeling away pieces of me, night after night? By the time the clock crept toward midnight, I was already staring at it. 12:17 was etched into my brain now, the hour of darkness, the hour of hiding. I didn't even question it anymore, just waited for it like a prisoner counts down to lights out. Then the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in, breathing hard, suitcase in hand. Normal. Too normal. "Checking in," he said. His voice was cheerful, casual. I blinked. "It's past 11. No check-ins allowed." He frowned. "I've been driving all night. Come on, just one night. I'll pay extra." "I can't. It's against the rules." His face shifted, frustration bleeding into his tone. "Are you serious right now?" I said I'll pay. What kind of business turns away customers? The clock ticked louder. 12:15. My hand started to shake. "Sir, please, you need to go." "Number, you need to do your job. Get me a room." He slammed his hand on the counter. I flinched. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. The second hand jumped to 12:17. As the clock hit 12:17, I threw myself under the desk and shut off the lobby lights. Darkness swallowed everything in an instant. My breath caught in my throat. The silence wasn't empty. It was listening. "What the hell are you doing?" The man's voice sliced through the blackness, sharp and angry from across the counter. I didn't respond. I curled into myself, knees drawn tight, hands pressed over my ears as if they could block out what I knew was coming. His voice turned. First frustration, then fear. Desperation seeped into his words, then gave way to something raw, animalistic. A scream tore through the lobby, not human in its pitch or cadence. It was the sound of something being stripped from the world it knew. A dragging noise followed, heavy, wet, grotesque. Something enormous slid across the linoleum with a sick, squelching pull. The sound snaked into my bones and settled there. And then, stillness. It wasn't peace. It was a void. I waited. I don't know how long. Seconds lost their meaning. When I finally moved, my body resisted like it had forgotten how. I crawled from behind the desk, breathing shallowly, and turned on the lights. The lobby looked untouched, eerily undisturbed. It was as if the man had never walked in, never argued, never screamed. The air buzzed faintly from the vending machine in the corner, the only sound in a space that had just moments ago been filled with chaos. I stood there, stunned, my mind scrambling to connect what I remembered with what I saw or didn't see. The man was gone, vanished completely, as if the motel itself had consumed him. There wasn't even a trace left behind. I blinked rapidly, hoping the act would return him to view, but the emptiness hit harder than his presence ever did. It wasn't just that he'd disappeared. It was the way the space no longer acknowledged he'd ever been there, like the darkness had claimed more than just his body. It had erased his existence. I stumbled outside. The night air hit me like a slap. My hands trembled as I lit a cigarette. I leaned against the motel's outer wall, eyes darting into the shadows, brain trying to make order from chaos. What had I seen? What had I let happen? A man had been standing here, talking, arguing. Now he was gone. I tried to force reason into the situation, but logic cracked under the weight of what I'd just lived through. I tried to make sense of it, but reason only sank deeper into confusion. The image of the man who had offered me money earlier returned, vivid and unsettling. My thoughts clung to him like static to skin. Then I saw him. He was walking along the far edge of the parking lot, the same jacket brushing against his legs with each step, the same familiar stride that somehow felt rehearsed. But when my eyes reached his face, my breath caught. His expression was fixed in a grin, unnaturally wide and deliberate, stretched far past comfort. I shouted, "Hey!" He kept walking. I called again, louder this time. He stopped. His movements were slow and mechanical. He turned, locking eyes with me from across the lot. The grin on his face widened, unnatural and cold. Then, without a word, he turned and resumed his path, disappearing step by step into the shadows. I couldn't move. That smile lingered in my mind like a burn on film, something no human should wear. A part of me recoiled from the recognition, and another whispered that this was retribution, a consequence for nearly violating Rule 8, for even daring to question the fabric of this place. I watched until he vanished, unsure if I was more afraid of what I saw or what I might become. I didn't want to drink the coffee. The thought alone made my stomach churn. My hands were still trembling from what had just happened, but I walked back inside and found the thermos waiting in its usual spot beneath the counter. I picked it up and felt the warmth against my palm. I unscrewed the cap and lifted it to my nose. The scent made my stomach flip. I stood there a long time just holding it, remembering the taste, the nausea, the nights I thought I wouldn't make it through. Then, with a deep breath, I walked to the restroom and poured it out. Watched it swirl down the drain like it had never existed. I wasn't ready to drink it. I wasn't ready to follow the rules. Not tonight. Not after everything I'd seen. I stared at the sink, the last drops of coffee swirling into nothingness, and whispered to myself, I'm not even sure the rules matter anymore. The shift began, but I didn't. Not really. Not the way I used to. I walked into the lobby like someone stepping back onto the battlefield, already knowing the ground was mined. Every step felt heavy, like it came with a question I hadn't asked. I didn't even bother clocking in. I was already here, wasn't I? Something inside me had cracked open the night before. Whatever comfort the rules had given me was gone, and with it, the illusion of control. The motel had shown me things, faces that vanished, rules that punished, darkness that wasn't empty. I had questions now, so many questions, and answers? They were hiding behind locked doors. Room 3. I didn't even know where it was until that moment. It sat at the end of the north hallway, tucked behind a bend I'd never bothered exploring. The number was faded on the door like someone had tried to scrub it off but gave up halfway through. Rule 2 rang in my head. Room 3 was always occupied. I wasn't supposed to knock, clean it, or even talk about it. I'd followed that rule without question. Tonight, obedience felt overrated. I stood before the door with my key ring in hand, my heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted to bolt. The key slipped in easier than I expected. The lock clicked with a sigh, and I pushed the door open. The stench hit first, thick, sour rot that coiled around my throat. My stomach rolled. The air inside was warm and wet, like breath from a dying thing. There was no furniture, only concrete floors and cracked walls, and in the middle of the room, a hole. Not a crack or damage or a forgotten maintenance project. A hole. Perfectly round, large enough to crawl through, lined with stone that didn't match the motel's construction. It went down to nothing. The scent came from that void. The rot, the heat, the pressure. My skin crawled just looking at it. Something inside me, old and primal, screamed to shut the door and never return. This was a gate, a threshold, a portal to something that had never been meant to enter this world, or perhaps something trying to leave it. I closed the door and leaned against it, sweating and shaking, eyes wide. My mind began to spiral, connecting pieces I hadn't dared to before. Could this be where the night visitors came from? That stench, that unnatural void in the floor. This room was wrong. I remembered seeing shadows linger near this hallway, vague shapes I'd dismissed as tricks of the light. But now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe this was a gate they used, a place they crossed through, night after night, wearing other people's faces. Then I remembered room 5, the medallion, the shadows. That door had secrets too, and I hadn't had a chance to understand them. I turned and headed down the hall. I was halfway to the room when the front bell rang. A man stood at the entrance, alone, no luggage. Room 5 echoed in my mind. He had the same stiff posture, the same unreadable expression. I watched him more closely this time. He blinked too slowly and turned his head with a pause like he was waiting for something. His movements were too calculated and deliberate, like someone mimicking human behavior without understanding it. Room for 1, he said. I walked back behind the desk, slid the room 5 key toward him and stood up. He took it without a word. I followed him down the corridor, eyes studying each subtle, unnatural twitch in his stride. The peeling wallpaper, the odd stains near the doorframe, and the slight hum in the air now seemed to frame something I shouldn't be walking toward. The door creaked open, and I peered inside. It was clean. Too clean. Sterile. Nothing personal. But there were marks on the floor where furniture had been dragged, dents in the wall like fists had once slammed into them. A chair lay on its side in the corner. He stepped in and stood silently in the center. I locked the door and returned to the lobby. My eyes drifted to the TV, a soft buzz humming from channel 63 as static danced across the screen. For a moment, it looked like nothing had changed. But then, flickers of movement began to form behind the noise. Shapes started to emerge, figures slipping in and out of the haze. I leaned in closer, eyes straining. The static shifted into something uncanny. There I was, standing in the lobby, staring directly into the screen. It was me, watching myself. My breath hitched, sweat forming at my temple. The screen pulsed again, cutting to a feed of the north hallway, then room 3, then the supply closet, and finally, my room. Each shot grainy and warped, yet unmistakable. The motel wasn't just showing images, it was showing me. I sat, frozen, the realization sinking in like a stone in my chest. The motel was watching me back. But why now? Then I remembered. The coffee. Last night I hadn't touched it, and tonight I hadn't either. Not yet, at least. The time for that hadn't come. Maybe that was it. Maybe the coffee had been a veil all along, something to keep the truth clouded. As unsettling as the footage was, it was also clarity, a glimpse through the static of my own understanding. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew I needed more of it. I needed more answers. Time dragged. I kept glancing at the clock. 11:55. I hadn't heard anything strange. I waited for the clock to crawl toward midnight, numb and aimless, haunted by the lingering echoes of the medallion. A silent dread had nested in my bones. Then, the knock shattered the stillness. Not from the front door. It came from the supply closet, every muscle locked as if someone had poured concrete through my veins. The sound wasn't loud, a firm, deliberate rap that cut through the air like a warning. I stood, legs wobbling beneath me, and approached the door slowly. Then came another knock, followed by a voice, muffled, desperate, edged with agony. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" My hand moved to the doorknob against my better judgment. I wasn't thinking about Rule 2, I was thinking about the voice. It was human, someone familiar, and utterly terrified. The voice broke again, more urgent, raw with pain. I opened the door. The light fell onto a nightmare. A man lay sprawled across the floor, stripped of skin, his raw tissue glistening and twitching like something newly born yet already dying. Blood pooled thick beneath him, spreading across the floor like a warning sign. He turned his head. Eyes met mine. "Jake, don't leave me here." Recognition snapped through me, his voice. That face, what was left of it. The guest from the previous night. The one who refused to leave. The one I'd turned away before the lights went out. I staggered back, hand trembling, heart pounding like a war drum in my ears. He writhed forward, leaving behind a crimson trail as he reached for me. "Please," he rasped, voice barely holding together. The shrill beep of my watch pierced the silence. It was 12:17, the time to shut off the lights. But I couldn't move. Not yet. Not with that man still crawling, bleeding, whispering my name behind the door. I hesitated. If I stayed, if I tried to help him, maybe I'd become like him. Skinless, writhing, crying for salvation that never came. Fear surged through me like fire, and I knew I didn't have the strength to fight both the rules and whatever waited in that darkness. With trembling hands and a hollow heart, I closed the closet door, each inch of it sealing away the sound of his plea. I turned and ran, every step a betrayal, every breath heavy with guilt. I reached the lobby and killed the lights, and I waited. Darkness swallowed the space, thick as fog. I crouched behind the desk, panting, trembling, eyes shut tight. Then the sounds began, heavy dragging, squelching, the wet slap of flesh against tile. Something moved past the desk, breathing loud and uneven. My heart hammered like a siren in my ears. The noises faded. I stayed still for a long time, breath held, heart uncertain. The silence felt too perfect, like the world holding its breath with me. Eventually, I rose and turned on the lights, my legs heavy and thoughts spiraling. I couldn't keep doing this, waiting, hiding, wondering if I was the next one. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was a taunt. I was unraveling, and I could feel it. Something in me refused to sit still. I stood, drawn forward by the memory of his voice, desperate and begging me not to leave him. I walked toward the supply closet, each step heavy with dread. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, matching the rhythm of my footsteps. I paused before the door, staring at the metal handle, remembering the way his eyes had locked with mine, pleading from inside that small space. I needed to know if he was still there if I'd left him to die, or if something else had already claimed him. I gripped the knob with a hand slick with sweat and slowly turned it. The hinges creaked as the door opened. Silence. The closet was empty. Nobody. The floor was streaked with blood, a thin trail weaving aimlessly across the tile, disappearing beneath the shelves. The metallic scent clung stubbornly to the air, thick enough to taste. Claw marks etched into the floor whispered of a desperate struggle. Just a barren floor, and a wall smeared faintly with something dark. It could have been old paint, or maybe just a shadow playing tricks. But I knew better. The metallic tang of blood still clung faintly in the air, and streaks along the ground, thin and red, led nowhere, just stopped, as if whatever had been dragged out simply vanished. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd let happen. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if fear or guilt would be the thing to kill me. I slumped into the chair behind the desk, thoughts spinning like blades. My mind went to the man who had given me his card, the one who had offered money in exchange for answers. I had seen him wandering outside, aimless and smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. I remembered that hollow look. But maybe I didn't have any other choice. I took the card out of my pocket. His number stared back at me, taunting in its simplicity. My hands shook as I dialed. The phone rang. Once, twice, 5 times. Finally, it picked up. Hello? His voice was calm, polite, almost bored, like he didn't remember me at all. It's Jake, I said, voice hoarse. You ask questions. About this place, I need to talk. A pause. Then, I'm sorry. Who is this? The motel, I pressed. You came here, gave me a card, asked questions. I turned you away. I think you've got the wrong number. My pulse spiked. Listen, there's a hole in room 3. A man with no skin in the supply closet. This place isn't real, or it's too real. I need help. There was silence. Then the voice on the other end changed. You broke a rule. Don't push your luck. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. The dial tone buzzed endlessly in my ear, each note another nail in the coffin of my sanity. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked, every breath shallow and tight. My thoughts raced, tripping over each other in panic. That voice, distorted and guttural, scraped against something deep inside me. It wasn't human, not even close. And if that thing could reach through a phone line, maybe nothing was safe anymore. I reached for the thermos under the counter, the one that always appeared at 3:33. My hands trembled as I unscrewed the lid and lifted it to my nose. It smelled like coffee, but I knew it wasn't. I poured it into a glass. The liquid oozed out, thick and tar-like. It wasn't brown, it was black, and it shimmered faintly under the light. Like oil, like something dead. What had I been drinking every night? Something was off. Every sip had dulled my thoughts, fogged my memory. They were feeding me a lie, using it to chain me to this place. Whatever was in that thermos served not to help me stay awake, but to keep me asleep. Keep me blind. Keep me here. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the glass. Then I carried it into the bathroom and poured it down the drain. The thick sludge clung to the porcelain before slowly disappearing. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I need to get out of here, I whispered. And I meant it. I no longer started my shift. I confronted it. Each night blurred into the next, a carousel of madness spinning faster with every rule I questioned. I'd stopped being afraid of breaking them. Now I feared what obedience made me. There was no order in this place, only chains dressed up as laws, and I'd worn them long enough. I began the night with preparation, a flashlight in my hand, a pocket knife tucked into my waistband. I made my way back to room 3. This time, I didn't hesitate. The air was thicker, the rot stronger. When I opened the door, the stench rushed out like a living thing. The hole had changed. It pulsed, alive, humming with a low vibration that rattled the walls. A wave of rot and heat surged from its depths. I aimed my flashlight inside and froze. Faces floated in the black, humanoid, and incomplete. Some twisted in silent screams, others had no eyes, just empty sockets staring through me. Mouths gaped too wide, as if unhinged. One whispered my name with a voice that didn't echo but bled into my bones. Behind the faces were cocoons, translucent and slimy sacs strung like lanterns across a fleshy web. Within each, a human form writhed. Some wore half-grown skin, others still twitched, rebirthing into something new. I realized with a sick drop in my gut that these were skinwalkers, incubating, waiting for their moment to emerge, to slip on stolen flesh. The stench turned metallic. I gagged, my knees buckled. I stumbled back, chest heaving, slammed the door with trembling hands and leaned against it, bile rising in my throat. As I turned to the supply closet next, a new wave of dread clawed at my chest. I hesitated mid-step, my eyes fixed on the door. The last time I opened it, I found a broken man, skinless and suffering, begging for help. He hadn't been there when I returned. The memory tightened around my ribs like a vice. Still, something inside me whispered that I couldn't keep avoiding it. If I wanted things to change, if I wanted to break this cycle, I had to face it, even if it terrified me. I approached slowly. The air shifted again, cooler now, as though the room itself held its breath. I gripped the knob with trembling fingers and yanked it open. For a moment, nothing. Silence. Then the walls groaned. Something massive pressed outward, heavy and impatient. A hand pushed through the shadows, raw muscle and sinew, bone glinting in the fluorescent light. Clawed, reaching. I slammed it shut before it could pull itself free, heart pounding in my chest. What I had just seen was a full view, not a fleeting shadow. It was a revelation, undeniable and clear. This place wasn't just haunted by shadows, it was a breeding ground for them. Whatever lived here, whatever fed off these rules, was growing stronger, and I was already too deep, already too late. Whatever came next would demand more than just survival. It would demand a reckoning. A sharp buzz made me spin around. The TV in the corner flickered to life, tuned to channel 63. Instead of static or unsettling visuals, it displayed a face of mine. Not a reflection, but something more unsettling. It studied me with unnatural calm, as if it already knew what I would do next. "You've gone too far. Stay. Let it all go. That would hurt less." The cadence was mine, but the weight behind it wasn't. My stomach turned. I reached for the remote and shut it off. The screen went black, yet the image lingered, burned into the void like a ghost behind closed eyes. I stood frozen, staring at nothing, feeling everything. That face. It wasn't warning me. It was inviting me. I heard footsteps echo behind me and turned slowly. There he was again, the man who had offered me money, the same man I'd seen aimlessly wandering the grounds, stood in the hallway. He wore the same clothes and had the same trimmed beard, but something was missing. His smile was stretched too tight, his eyes void of recognition. It was like he'd been reset. I took a step closer. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at me and said, in the calmest, flattest voice I'd heard all night, "I don't know you. Are you a guest here?" My stomach sank. I had spoken to him. He'd offered me a bribe. He'd wanted answers. I opened my mouth, but no words came. He turned, about to leave, then paused and faced me again. His voice dropped, something deeper pushing through. "You can't change anything unless we let you. Stop trying. Walk away." That's the only peace you'll get." Then he walked off as if none of it had ever happened. And I stood there, realizing the message was about more than fear. It represented futility. And maybe I'd just heard it too late. A man appeared at 11:30. I didn't hear a knock. I didn't hear anything at all. There was only presence, sudden and undeniable. Tall, with a sharp jawline, dressed immaculately. There was a practiced stillness about him, like someone who had waited in the same spot 1,000 times before. "Frank," he said calmly, as though I were supposed to remember him. The name sparked recognition, not from anything I remembered, but because I had been told to know it. I was supposed to give him the master key and say, "Welcome back." But my throat caught. I hesitated. He looked at me, his gaze unreadable. His expression revealed nothing, neither welcome nor warning, only a quiet expectation that weighed heavily in the air. I didn't want to say it, but my lips moved. "Welcome back." He took the key with a nod. "You're close," he said. "Closer than most." He turned away. I followed him. "Is this your job? Keeping people trapped?" He stopped. For the first time, something flickered across his face, perhaps regret, or maybe warning. "I used to be where you are," he said. "You think this place punishes rule breaking? It punishes the wrong kind of questions more. Then why are you still here? I didn't choose fast enough. But you can. Burn it all, or become me." He walked away, his footsteps quiet against the linoleum, retreating into a hallway that hadn't been there just minutes ago. I stood motionless, a heavy realization settling in my chest. Frank didn't need to convince me with words. His presence alone spoke volumes. The hallway swallowed him, and with him, the sense of inevitability grew stronger. Somehow, I knew what had to be done, and I knew he had once stood exactly where I was now, burdened with the same terrible clarity. I ran to the gas station, the same one where I'd met that kind of old man days ago. He wasn't there, but the pumps still worked. I filled a can and drove back before 12 o'clock. I stood in the hallway, a can of gasoline in my hand, pulse pounding like a war drum. I thought about where to start. The pit. Room 3. That's where they bred. That's where they waited. If I burned this place down, there was a chance innocent people might still be inside. But if I didn't, those people would eventually be hunted by the things that crawled through that pit. Skinwalkers didn't negotiate. They consumed. And if I was going to stop this, I had to do it before 12:17, before the light died and they roamed freely. I doused room 3 first. Gasoline soaked the carpet, the walls, and the doorframe. The fumes clung to the air, sharp and suffocating, yet still not enough to mask the foul, wet stench spilling from the black pit in the center of the room. I stood at the threshold, watching the darkness pulse and quiver like a breathing wound. Half-formed bodies dangled from the fleshy walls, suspended in twitching, glistening sacks. Some had human eyes, some had animal limbs, none of them whole. The pit itself seemed to groan in protest, as if aware of what I intended. Faces swirled within, familiar and hollow, stretching toward me in silent agony. I thought of the victims, the ones devoured, the ones replaced. Skinwalkers slumbered here, curled tight in their cocoons, waiting to rise. Every instinct screamed to run, but I stepped forward instead and emptied the gas can. The walls didn't hiss, they wept, like the place was mourning itself. Then I moved to room 5. It was the room I'd assigned with shaking hands, the one where something had moved that didn't move like anything human. I stepped inside with my heart thudding like a warning bell. The air was heavier, charged. Shadows in the corners seemed to twitch, watching. I scanned the space with my flashlight, the furniture undisturbed, the bed perfectly made, but the energy was wrong. Wrong in the kind of way that made your instincts claw at your spine. I poured the gasoline with steady, deliberate hands, letting it trail along the carpet, beneath the bed, over the dresser. This wasn't just about burning a place. It was about severing something's hold. The supply closet came next. My hands trembled as I approached, memories of the claw and sinew searing through my mind. I couldn't predict what might emerge if I opened it all the way. The fear of what might be hiding behind that door crawled up my spine. I cracked the door just enough to create an opening and poured the gasoline through the gap, heart hammering against my ribs. The fuel spread across the tiles inside, the fumes wrapping around me like a warning. The lobby was last, the center, the heart. The TV sparked to life as I splashed gasoline across the floor. Channel 63 switched on again without a remote. I didn't look at it. Not yet. Finally, the thermos. I unscrewed the lid, peered inside. The black liquid inside recoiled like it sensed what was coming. I poured gasoline on it too. Whatever this was, whatever they were feeding me, it wouldn't survive tonight. Channel 63 flickered back on, unprompted. The screen displayed my face, aged, weary, wearing the same coat Frank had on earlier. The eyes weren't mine anymore. They carried something colder, more resolute. "You won't destroy this," the screen said. "You'll inherit it. Let go of the fire. Accept your place." My grip on the matchbox tightened. My breath hitched. The voice on the screen grew softer, almost pleading. "You could make it easier. The pain, the questions, all of it could end." I looked at the thermos one last time. The liquid inside shimmered unnaturally. I'd tasted their control. Enough was enough. "I'm not staying," I muttered. Then I struck the match. Flames caught fast. The motel screamed, with something deeper than wood or metal, something ancient. I threw the match into the pit in room 3 and watched it take. The air cracked. The walls pulsed. At 12:17, I killed the lobby lights and bolted through the front door. Fire chased at my heels, licking the air with greedy tongues. Shadows writhed in the flames, monstrous silhouettes twisting and screaming as they burned, the skinwalkers caught by the darkness they once ruled. I reached the parking lot coughing, my chest seizing with smoke. The air was heavy, suffocating. I turned back toward the inferno, heat washing over me like a tidal wave. Flames surged through the motel's windows, climbing the walls, devouring the place room by room. The scream of dying things was drowned by the roar of fire. I didn't know if I'd made it out, but I knew it was finally ending. The fire kept rising. The faces in the void twisted, the TV shattered, the pit collapsed. And when I turned, I saw Frank standing at the edge, still alive, still whole. Relief burst in my chest, wild and thoughtless. I hadn't expected to see him again. For a fleeting second, I smiled. We had survived. At least, I thought we had. "You made a choice," he said. "I did." He nodded, then turned and vanished. The motel burned, and as I stood there, covered in ash and sweat, I looked into the flames and whispered, "I got out, but you're still watching, aren't you?" Months pass. Now I stand behind the register of a remote gas station, the kind nobody remembers except when they need to. The sky outside stays a dull gray, and the buzz of the fluorescent lights above becomes part of the silence. I tell myself I'm safe, that the motel is gone, that the fire ended it all. The days bleed together. The monotony is its comfort. I stack shelves, I mop the floor, I serve coffee to strangers and smile like I believe this life is real. Until the bell rings. I glance up. The man at the counter stares with vacant eyes and a grin that stretches just a little too wide. My breath catches in my throat. He's not just any customer. He's one of them. The pit may have burned, the rooms reduced to ash, the screams silenced, but something escaped. He tilts his head, the smile never fading. No words, just that look. Recognition without humanity. The air is heavy again, thick with unseen pressure. My hands tremble as I take a step back. I thought I got out, but they never left. And now, they know where I am. The sky hung above like a slab of lead, suspended just low enough to press on my senses without ever fully descending. Inside the vibrating body of the helicopter, I stared through the foggy window, watching the Gulf of Mexico stretch endlessly in every direction. The sea shifted between blue and gray, its surface unbroken by land, only the occasional ripple hinting at motion beneath. The thrum of the rotor blades pushed against my chest like a second heartbeat. I had flown over deserts, forests, cities, but nothing prepared me for this, an ocean that refused to end. Back in Texas, I had worked on rigs before. I wasn't fresh off training like some greenhorn chasing danger for its own sake. I had experience, a degree in petroleum engineering, and the hardened attitude that came with years of field work. But this assignment was different. The money alone was staggering, nearly double my previous contracts. Yet what unsettled me more was the speed, the way events had unfolded with unsettling urgency, the way the company's recruiters had moved mountains to bring me on board in less than a week. It had felt less like a job offer and more like an enlistment. The rig emerged slowly from the haze as the helicopter began its descent. At first I mistook it for a cargo ship, then some sort of sea fortress. But within seconds, its true shape revealed itself, a sprawling metallic behemoth anchored in the middle of the deep. Towering cranes rotated in synchronized silence, rust-colored pipes wrapped around its central column like arteries. Steel walkways crossed like spider webs above the churning dark. It was neither ship nor shore. It was something else entirely, a city carved out of iron and isolation. The moment the skids touched down, a gust of hot, salt-heavy air swept through the cabin. I stepped out, and the scent of diesel and rust punched me in the face. Beneath my boots, the metal deck hummed with a resonance beyond the rhythm of machines, something deeper, a vibration that felt almost alive. The entire structure breathed. It breathed through long, mechanical exhales, steady and unnerving. It was less like stepping into a workplace and more like entering the ribs of a beast. A man approached from the far side of the landing pad. He wore a navy blue coverall streaked with oil and time. His gait was firm, but one leg dragged slightly, as if the rig itself had taken its toll. Without introduction, he handed me a pair of thick, yellow-tinted goggles. The lenses were scratched but sturdy, the frame slightly warped. "Put these on. Keep them on, even at night," he said. His voice was sharp, direct. "You'll understand why soon enough." I blinked. I opened my mouth to ask a question, but the man turned and walked away without responding. After a few steps, he stopped and reached into his breast pocket. From it, he produced a sealed envelope, plain and unmarked, the kind used for confidential memos or final warnings. He handed it over. "This is your briefing. Memorize it. Don't ask questions about it. You've already signed everything necessary." I stared at the envelope in my hand, the weight of it oddly disproportionate to its size. I had signed the contract before ever laying eyes on this place, back in a sterile office in Houston, where the recruiter's words had moved faster than my doubt. At the time, the numbers had silenced my caution. Now, standing in the belly of this iron leviathan, I couldn't help but wonder if that decision had been mine at all, or if I had simply stepped into a story already written. The man walked ahead. I fell into step behind him, clutching the envelope. The walkway beneath us clanged with each footfall, a harsh metal echo swallowed by the wind. Around us, workers moved in practiced silence. The mechanical symphony of generators and cranes filled the air, the shriek of gears locked in endless duty. We crossed several junctions, past stairwells leading both up and deep below, until we reached the personnel quarters. As I paused to open the envelope, something in the distance groaned. Not machinery. Something deeper, older. But when I looked up, only the cranes were moving, slow and indifferent. I sat on a metal bench tucked into the corner of the corridor, away from the foot traffic. The envelope crinkled slightly as I tore open its flap and slid out a single sheet of paper. 7 lines greeted me. There was a lack of letterhead and signature, containing only 7 numbered rules, printed in bold type, their austerity more unsettling than any detailed instruction manual. They read like commandments, though no one had called them that. I began reading the first one slowly. 1. Always wear the yellow goggles, even at night. The instruction made me blink. Goggles for nighttime? I expected safety gear, but this felt excessive. Still, I looked at the scratched lenses in my hand and couldn't bring myself to argue. Maybe they knew something I didn't. 2. Never descend to the lowest level alone, especially at night. It struck me as oddly specific. I hadn't even seen the lower levels yet, but the phrasing told me all I needed. Something about that place demanded company, or at least a witness. 3. If you see blood or a bloodstain, do not touch it. Contact the designated unit immediately. Straightforward. Strange, but straightforward. Still, the idea that blood warranted a dedicated response team felt ominous. Had there been accidents down here? Or worse? 4. If the clock reverses, hide and remain silent. I raised my eyebrows. The clock? What kind of malfunction would make time run backward? I couldn't make sense of it, and that alone made it unsettling. 5. No group of 3 or more is allowed outside designated work zones. That one was bureaucratic on the surface. A measure to prevent horseplay, maybe. Or perhaps the management didn't like too much chatter outside of controlled spaces. 6. Radios must remain on the assigned frequency at all times. That made operational sense, but written here with the rest, it suggested something more. Like deviation came with consequences. 7. One employee will be served a special meal each week. That employee is to finish it completely. This reads like tradition. A morale booster, maybe. Yet the phrasing put me off. Is to finish it completely. Not optional, not celebratory. It sounded like an obligation. I read over them again. The rules stood apart, disconnected at first glance, but collectively outlined a rigid framework for life on the rig. They seemed designed to enforce control, although the rationale behind each remained hidden. I wasn't sure if they were intended to protect us or to ensure our compliance. I stared ahead for a long time, letting the weight of the words sink in. Each line hinted at a context I had not yet encountered. They carried the chill of something prearranged and enforced with precision. These weren't mere guidelines. They read like terms of an agreement I had already entered into. I folded the paper and tucked it into my breast pocket. As I glanced out the narrow porthole, something quick and large flickered in the mist near the base of the rig. I dismissed it as a bird or a drifting shadow, unwilling to consider anything more. Behind me, the metal door shut with a mechanical sigh. The rig, it seemed, had swallowed me whole. That evening, after a lukewarm meal and a brief orientation video that said more in what it omitted than what it declared, I wandered the rig alone. The fading light painted the walkways in layers of copper and violet. I passed bulkheads, storage containers, coiled hosing, and workers whose faces seemed to blur in the shadows. Eventually, I found myself standing before a steel door, marked only by a keypad and a yellowed sign that had been scratched beyond recognition. Behind it, a stairwell led downward, disappearing into dimness that no bulb seemed able to penetrate. I did not open it. The thought crossed my mind, lingered there, but I pulled it back. I would be working down there eventually, and I wasn't about to set the wrong tone on my first day. Instead, I stood still, hand grazing the railing, aware of the cold draft whispering out from below, and let curiosity remain unanswered for now. By the time I returned to my quarters, night had deepened. The wind scraped along the walls like distant fingernails. Metal groaned in places it shouldn't. I stood at the center of the small room, feeling the strangeness of it all settle around me. My first hours on the rig had already gone in a direction I hadn't expected. There was something eerie in the air, true, but beneath it ran the thrill of finally working where I had always aimed to be. A place where my training, my experience, my time meant something. Where the work mattered. where the stakes were real. I undressed, set my boots by the locker, folded my coveralls, and reached for the goggles. It felt strange to wear them indoors, even stranger at night, but I didn't hesitate for long. If that was the rule, I'd follow it. They wouldn't make it mandatory without reason. With a breath, I slid them over my eyes. The yellow tint dulled the edges of the room, softening the electric light into a murky sepia. I lay back on the cot, arms across my chest, the light vibration of the rig running through the mattress like a living pulse. It was already clear this job would be nothing like the work I'd done on land. The morning light on the rig was unlike anything I'd known on land. It had a way of spreading itself thin, filtering through salt-heavy air and the geometry of iron beams until it felt more like a suggestion than a presence. I opened my eyes to that watery glow, already aware of the low tremble under my cot. It was a reminder that I was not on Earth, not exactly, but on a suspended colossus, floating in industrial limbo. My goggles were still on. They'd pressed a shallow ridge into my forehead overnight, but I left them there. Part habit, part caution. The rules had a way of sticking, even the ones that didn't make sense. Outside, the corridor buzzed with the dull routine of machinery. I made my way to the mess hall, where the silence said more than any conversation could. The room was full, yet the air was thick with unsaid things. Conversations were quiet, and eyes were tired. I noticed how many wore their goggles like I did, even while eating. No one looked at each other for long. A man in an orange jumpsuit, older and weather-creased, nodded at me and handed me a clipboard. "You're with Reed today. Tool check in 15. Then he turned away without another word. His abruptness hit me harder than I expected. I'd worked in rough environments before, places where pleasantries weren't common, but this felt different. There was no sense of camaraderie, no trace of acknowledgement beyond the bare minimum. It was as if I'd walked into a prison instead of a job site, and the guards didn't bother pretending otherwise. Reed turned out to be tall and clean-shaven, with a lined face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. We met near the central shaft where the rig's vertical core loomed like the spine of some long-buried animal. He skipped introductions and skipped the handshake. His eyes brushed over me, and he tilted his head toward the elevator that descended into the lower levels. I followed. The elevator whined as it dropped us down. Each floor we passed got darker, damper, and more distant from the rhythm of the upper decks. The metal walls here were lined with condensation. Pipes hissed, like breathing things. As we stepped out, the lights above flickered, casting brief shadows that stretched too long for comfort. I took it all in, how the air grew heavy, how sound muffled itself in corners, and asked, "What exactly goes on down here?" Reed didn't stop walking. "Stick to the inspection points, don't wander." "But what is this level for? It feels different. There's even a rule written just for this place." He turned, finally meeting my eyes behind our shared yellow tint. "Best not to ask questions about this part. Do your work, follow the checklist, and we'll get out clean." That was the first time I heard the phrase, "get out clean," used like that. It wasn't about oil or grease, it was something else. We moved through a narrow tunnel of steel, our boots echoing softly in tandem. The smell here had shifted, less diesel, more brine and metal. There were valves to check, pressure gauges to log, and seals to mark for maintenance. I noticed how Reed never let me walk behind him. He always positioned himself so I was either beside or slightly ahead, as if he didn't trust his back to anyone in this space. I started to understand why. Our checklist was nearly done by the time we looped back toward the junction where we'd started. I felt a slight easing in Reed's posture, and I assumed we were wrapping up for the day. We turned a corner into a wider hall where the overhead clock came into view. It was mounted high on a bulkhead, slightly dusted but unmistakably working. Or so I thought. As I lifted my pen to mark the final reading, the corridor lights faltered. First a dimming, then a violent stutter, like a heartbeat gone arrhythmic. I looked up instinctively, The second hand had slowed to a crawl, paused for a breathless moment, then resumed its motion in a slow, steady reversal. My breath caught. I remembered the list, the part about the clock. The rule had seemed absurd when I read it, a kind of scare tactic meant to keep new hires alert. But now, as I watched that second hand tick backwards, the warning felt carved into stone. My voice came out lower than I expected. Is that supposed to happen? Reed turned his head slowly, saw what I was seeing, and without a word, dropped into a crouch beside the nearest wall. He gestured sharply for me to do the same. I lowered myself. Heart pounding. The metal felt colder now. Reed pressed his fingers to his lips, the gesture universal. Silence. I heard something. A pulse. It felt as if an immense creature breathed beneath the surface, its exhale slow and deliberate, displacing water in a way that echoed through the steel floor. The rhythm wasn't steady. It surged in deep, irregular waves, like a body moving through the sea, brushing against the walls of its enclosure. Each vibration whispered of weight and purpose. I dared not speak. Something in my bones told me to remain absolutely still. The clock continued its slow, reversed ticking. In the silence, it became thunderous, a countdown to something I couldn't name. Reed kept his eyes down, goggles firm on his face. I mirrored him. The corridor stretched before us, shadowed and indifferent. Then, as abruptly as it started, the reversed ticking ceased. The second hand stopped again. The normal hum of electricity returned, and the lights steadied. Reed didn't move for another 30 seconds, then finally exhaled and stood up. "Why?" I started, but he cut me off with a glance. His calm, rehearsed control unsettled me. How could he act like this was normal? Like it was a scheduled drill rather than something unnatural twisting the core of this place? I stared at him, trying to understand how a man could witness that and respond with such clarity. "Don't speak about it. Just note the time on your log and move on." I scribbled down the numbers with a shaky hand. My thoughts raced with speculation, but I forced myself to file them away for later. The rig had its own logic, and it demanded obedience over curiosity. We moved forward, turning into a side hall lined with closed doors. My pulse still hadn't returned to normal after what we had just seen. The image of that clock rewinding, the strange pulse reverberating through the walls, it stayed with me like a shadow clinging to my back. I kept thinking about the rule. If the clock ticks in reverse, hide and stay silent. At the time, it felt like a superstition meant to unnerve us. But now I wasn't so sure. What kind of place writes rules for time moving backwards? Reed stopped abruptly. His entire frame tensed as if struck by a silent alarm. There was a taut readiness in his body that said this was not unfamiliar to him. He'd lived it before. He knew what came next. That unsettled me more than anything else could have. I followed his line of sight. On the metal floor just ahead, a dark pool of blood had settled in an unnatural stillness. It wasn't fresh, but it hadn't aged into obscurity either. The edges had begun to crust, a rusty brown outline enclosing a thick, almost congealed center. It looked like it had been waiting there for someone to notice. I stepped forward before I could stop myself, driven by the instinct to investigate, to help, maybe even just to understand. "Don't," Reed snapped, voice sharp as broken glass. "Not even close." I froze, mid-step. His tone was commanding in a way that revealed deep fear. That realization gripped my chest harder than the sight of blood ever could. He pulled the radio from his belt and clicked through frequencies until he hit the designated channel. "This is Deck C4. We have a red mark sighting. Send containment." Static crackled, followed by a brief affirmation. Reed tucked the radio away and gave me a look I couldn't interpret. A moment later, distant metallic footsteps echoed faintly through the corridor. The containment team was on its way. The sound grew louder with a rhythm that felt trained and familiar, not panicked. Whatever they were coming for, they had done it before. "Let's go," he said. "We finished the route. They'll handle that." I couldn't stop glancing back. I had seen blood on rigs before. Accidents were part of the job. Yet something about Reed's response unsettled me. The precision with which he changed the radio frequency, the speed of his call, and the unyielding order to stay away all pointed to a deeper concern. I found myself wondering whether it had really been blood. Could it have been a chemical leak mistaken for something else? Or was it somehow connected to the strange behavior of the clock earlier? The thoughts circled, refusing to settle. As we continued, I understood something in my gut. The rig had rules because failing to follow them could trigger consequences no one wanted to name aloud. Each directive seemed designed to preserve safety, a desperate attempt to contain something too dangerous to explain. The shift ended with Reed giving me a simple nod before disappearing toward the higher decks. Without a debrief or a single word of explanation, I stood at the stairwell, one foot on the bottom step, the other hesitant. I went back up slowly, goggles fogged at the edges, brain cluttered with questions I had no business asking. Someone needed to explain this. The rule sheet had hinted at danger, but no one had bothered to say what kind. I looked for a face, a gesture, anything that might crack the silence, but every technician I passed seemed locked in their own quiet routine. It was as if the entire facility had taken a vow of silence, their avoidance of conversation shaped by something more than habit, molded into policy. By the time I reached my quarters, the hallway lights had dimmed to a steady amber hue. I closed the door and leaned back against it, letting the cold press through my shirt into my spine. Inside, the silence pressed in from all sides. I sat on the cot, goggles still in place, and tried to steady my breathing. The day had left me shaken. The rules weren't suggestions. They were barriers, and something was pressing against them from the other side. I didn't know what. I only knew I had followed the instructions and still felt like I had come too close to something no one wanted to acknowledge. The rig demanded compliance, and today I understood why. I woke with the weight of the goggles pressing deep lines into my face, the plastic digging into the bridge of my nose, and the soft skin around my eyes. The habit of wearing them through the night had become more than routine. It had become a kind of tether, an unspoken pact with the silence that hovered over everything. But now they itched. They pressed too hard. The skin beneath them was tender, and I felt the discomfort crawling toward pain. I sat up slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the dim glow filtering through the slit-like window. The rig outside breathed its metal rhythm, steady and uncaring. I rubbed the marks on my face, then reached for the radio unit clipped to my belt. It was routine now to check it. I always checked the same frequency and channel. Still, something in me hesitated. I turned the dial just a touch. Static. Another notch. A hum. Then a voice. I turned the dial again. Two voices slipped through the static, low, deliberate, and unaware they were being heard. One of them spoke first, his tone composed but distant, like someone reading from a checklist. He has no one, no wife, no kids, no legal attachments. It's a clean choice. The second voice, slightly raspier and more casual, answered quickly. And he's quiet, keeps to himself, doesn't poke around. There was a long pause, the kind that thickens the air. Then came a brief chuckle, more like an exhale than laughter. He won't be missed. I leaned in, barely breathing. Something about the way they spoke felt rehearsed. They weren't debating, they were confirming. A final decision disguised as routine. The first voice returned, its edge sharpened. Then it settled, set the table. My pulse kicked. I didn't know who they were talking about, but the clinical tone of their discussion chilled me. A clean choice. Set the table. The phrasing felt rehearsed, euphemistic, and then I heard the word dinner. That's when the door slid open. A tall man in a blue utility jacket stepped in, his boots scuffing the threshold. He walked straight to me, plucked the radio from my hand, adjusted the dial back to the assigned frequency, and thrust it into my palm. Frequencies are locked for a reason. You change them again, and you're endangering everyone. Understood? I nodded, stunned. He left without another word. I sat there a moment longer, the radio still warm in my hand. The voices I had heard replayed in my mind, their cold precision, the way they chose someone, as if it were an inventory task. And now this, his urgency, the way he snatched the device, as if I'd stumbled onto something I had no right to witness. It wasn't just a security protocol. There was something they were trying very hard to keep buried. Whatever this plan was, whatever they were preparing for, it was important enough to shield with silence and sealed channels, and I had caught a sliver of it by accident. Moments later, another knock came. A crew coordinator stepped into the room, his tone all duty and no warmth. He didn't ask how I was, didn't look twice at my face or the mark the goggles had left, just handed me a folded assignment sheet like sliding a file under a prison cell door. "You're with Baker today. Reed's rerouted." I nodded again, slower this time. There was no room for questions, no chance to object. It felt less like taking a new post and more like being transferred under surveillance. The way orders were handed down, the way eyes lingered in the halls. This place operated more like a sentence than a workplace. And when I had joked before about it being a prison, I hadn't realized how close I was to the truth. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about Reed. He was the only one here who had spoken to me with any trace of normalcy, the only presence that made this place feel somewhat navigable. There was a quiet steadiness about him, not warm, but not cold either. He responded when I spoke, didn't turn away. And now, without a word, he was gone. It made me wonder if I had pushed too far with my questions the day before, if I had drawn the wrong kind of attention. Maybe his removal was meant as a warning. Maybe it was my fault. Outside, the platform groaned beneath a shifting tide, and the day began. The mess hall carried a heavier quiet than usual. Trays clattered against metal tables, boots echoed on the grated floor, and everyone kept their eyes on their plates. Conversations were nearly non-existent, drowned out by the metallic scrape of utensils and the low hum of overhead lights. Most were too focused on chewing, swallowing, and keeping their heads down to notice anything else. Then the overhead speaker clicked on, breaking the dull rhythm. A flat voice echoed through the room. "Special meal assignment. Baker. Section D double quote." No one clapped or nodded. Not a single reaction acknowledged the announcement. Heads lifted only for a moment, then dropped back to their meals. Baker himself barely reacted. He stood, walked to the counter and was handed a tray, unlike the others. Stainless steel with a covered dish, a small cup of something viscous and dark beside it. I watched him from 2 tables over, stunned into stillness. My mind reeled back to the voices I'd picked up that morning, the calm discussion about selecting someone with no family, no attachments, someone who wouldn't be missed. Baker's name hadn't been mentioned, but the coincidence gnawed at me. Out of everyone, he was the one chosen for this special meal. Was it really random? Or had I overheard the plan before it unfolded? My stomach tightened further as I realized I was now paired with him for the day. I didn't know what exactly had been decided over that hidden frequency, but the possibility that Baker was at the center of it made my skin crawl. I wondered, with a cold kind of fear, whether I'd be expected to watch something happen to him or help cover it up. Baker returned to his seat and ate in silence. His movements were mechanical. He chewed slowly, swallowed with effort. His hands trembled once, then steadied. I kept expecting him to stop, but he finished everything on the tray. When he was done, he simply stood and waited. After Baker finished his meal, he stood without speaking and made his way toward the door. I hesitated before rising to follow. My limbs felt heavy, as if that quiet meal had shifted the atmosphere around us. We left the mess in silence, walking side by side toward the southern sector where our assignment waited. The corridors felt longer than usual, stretched by the weight of what I had seen and heard. The maintenance zone loomed ahead, lit by flickering overheads that hummed just above hearing. Pipes lined the walls, sweating condensation that dropped like slow rain onto the metal grates below. The air was dense with salt and machinery. Our boots left dark, wet trails behind us. Baker hadn't spoken once since we'd left the mess. I glanced at him more than once, noting the stiffness in his shoulders, the vacant look in his eyes. Something in him had gone slack, like a wire pulled too tight had finally snapped. Trying to cut through the silence, I asked if he was feeling all right. "Just tired," he muttered. It was the kind of answer you give when you don't want follow-up questions. His voice was flat, missing the human flicker of mood or thought. I tried again, softer this time. "Have you ever talked to your family from out here?" He stopped walking for a beat, then turned to look at me. His eyes held me for longer than felt natural. Then, barely audible, he said, "Not in a while." We resumed walking. I kept pace beside him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching someone dissolving from the inside out. His steps lagged behind slightly. He forgot basic steps in our procedure, missed hand signals, and overlooked tools right in front of him. When he bent to pick up a pipe joint, his fingers swiped past it like he wasn't fully seeing it. Then, as he reached for a wrench, it slipped through his grip and crashed onto the floor. He didn't even flinch. I leaned closer, voice low. "They might have done something to your food. Are you sure you're all right?" He turned to me, his lips parted slightly as if trying to respond, but no words came. His gaze passed through me. It was like trying to talk to someone underwater, distorted and unreachable. His breath had become shallow. His eyes were glazed over. I said his name once, then again. And then he dropped. I caught him by reflex, arms wrapping around his torso to stop his head from hitting the grated floor. He was still breathing, but unresponsive, eyes open yet blank. The coldness of his skin startled me. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio clipped to my side. My thumb struggled to find the button, every second dragging beneath the weight of panic. "This is Section D, immediate medical, crew member down." A crackle of static broke the silence, then a curt voice answered, devoid of emotion. "Acknowledged. Hold position." The line went dead. I crouched beside Baker, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow, uneven movements. His skin had taken on a pale sheen, and his eyes, though open, showed nothing. There was no recognition, no flicker of awareness. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Two figures appeared from around the corner, clad head to toe in pristine white hazard suits. Their movements were synchronized, practiced, almost too smooth. They moved in silence, neither speaking nor asking questions. They lifted Baker between them, careful yet impersonal, and turned back the way they came. I pushed myself to my feet and stumbled after them. "Wait! Where are you taking him? What happened to him?" One of the figures paused just long enough to glance over their shoulder. The helmet obscured their face entirely. "Take a break. Return to quarters. That's your instruction." Then they continued without hesitation, their boots echoing against the metal floor until the sound disappeared into the rig's deeper corridors. I remained there, rooted to the spot, watching the empty hallway. 1,000 questions pressed against my skull, but none found a voice. I didn't know whether to follow or flee. All I knew was that something had just shifted, and whatever came next, I would face it alone. I returned to my quarters, but rest was impossible. My legs wouldn't stay still, and my thoughts refused to settle. The silence in the room felt tighter than usual, like the walls themselves were listening. Eventually, I stepped out and began to wander the rig, drifting through corridors as if searching for something unnamed. The lights flickered overhead in irregular patterns, and every closed door hummed with quiet tension. My feet carried me closer to the lower levels. I wasn't even sure how far I had gone, until I noticed the air thickening, the metal walls sweating with condensation. Then I saw him. At the far end of the corridor, barely lit by the emergency bulbs, stood Baker. I ducked behind a column instinctively, my heart pounding. He moved slowly, almost floating, his steps aimless and detached. His posture was unnatural, his head angled slightly as if listening to something deep beneath the platform. I checked my watch. It was late, far past curfew for non-critical zones. What was he doing here? Without hesitation, he approached the door that led to the bottom deck, the one marked off in the protocol. He pressed his hand against the panel and it slid open with a reluctant hiss. Then he stepped through. He didn't close it. Compelled by something between curiosity and dread, I followed. I crept along the edge of the metal walkway, keeping to the shadows. The lower deck opened into a vast chamber with exposed piping and vents that bled steam. I climbed a ladder that led to a service catwalk above, giving me a vantage point. From there, I watched him. Baker stood near the grated center of the platform, where an open shaft descended directly into the sea. He swayed slightly, eyes unfocused. That's when I noticed he wasn't wearing his goggles, the one thing we were told to never remove, the one rule drilled into us from day one. My breath caught in my throat, and a sick realization crawled up my spine. The stillness shattered. A sudden low roar erupted from below, like something massive shifting through deep water. It vibrated through the steel under my feet and rattled the railings. The sound was thick, wet, and unmistakably organic. Not a machine, not an echo. It reminded me of a creature surfacing for air, exhaling as it moved beneath the platform. My whole body tensed as the noise faded, but the weight of it lingered in the air. I turned, and my gaze locked on the maintenance clock mounted above the exit hatch. It had stopped. Its hands began ticking backward. The rule, the one I had read, the warning. I dropped back down, heart hammering, and slipped through the lower corridor. I crouched behind a series of barrels, my view partially obscured, but enough to still see Baker. His body jerked forward once, then again, and then he vanished. Not with a scream, not with struggle. It was as if the sea reached up through the shaft and plucked him away. A quiet, horrifying pull. I stayed hidden, barely breathing, until the sound stopped and the air cleared. When I stepped back out, the door still hung open. My eyes darted back to the shaft one last time, unsure whether what I had just witnessed had truly happened. My heart hammered in my chest as I inched toward the exit, each step unsteady. The hands on the wall clock had begun to move normally again, ticking forward as if nothing had happened. I stood frozen for a moment, unable to process it all. It felt like I was walking out of a dream I couldn't fully wake from. Without looking back again, I made my way into the corridor, dazed and reeling, determined to return to my room. I needed to sit, to think, to breathe. A figure turned the corner just as I crossed the threshold. One of the supervisors. His face twisted into something like panic before hardening. "What are you doing here? You're not authorized to be down here. Baker, he went in there. Something took him. I saw it happen. He didn't struggle." The supervisor's eyes didn't flicker. His voice stayed level, colder than before. "That's enough. You saw nothing that concerns you." He didn't care. Not a trace of urgency, not a single word of concern, as if it hadn't mattered at all, as if Baker never existed. He grabbed my arm, tight. "Return to your quarters, now." He didn't let go until we had cleared the hall. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. It was no longer speculation, no longer distant. I had seen it. Something lived beneath this place, and it had taken Baker. The thought wouldn't leave me. The goggles were more than a uniform requirement. They served a purpose, a shield against something real. Every rule we were given carried weight, not as suggestions, but as barriers between us and something far worse. I wasn't safe, not even close. The events of the previous day had unsettled me to the core. I couldn't sleep without replaying every moment. Baker's distant eyes, the tremor in his hands, the way he collapsed without resistance. The look on his face showed no pain. Something inside had simply gone dark. The silence afterward was louder than any scream. This wasn't exhaustion or illness. This was something else, and no one seemed interested in explaining it. By morning, I felt a new kind of resolve. I needed to know what this place really was. Baker's disappearance couldn't be treated like an accident. There had to be documentation, incident reports, logs, anything. I didn't know what I expected to find, but the impulse to uncover something real, something I could hold on to, was stronger than my fear. There was a place I hadn't been allowed to enter, the archive level. I'd passed the door during earlier maintenance routes. It was sealed with a coated panel and bore a metal placard reading, "Restricted personnel only." That had to be it. When the corridor was clear, I made my way down the eastern arm of the rig. The door stood at the far end, unguarded but completely sealed. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what I would do if I actually made it inside. But the keypad was locked. I tapped it once, twice, hoping for a prompt or a hint. Nothing. There was no key card or biometric scan, only a blank denial. Disappointed but still desperate, I returned to my quarters. There had to be another way to listen in, to intercept what they were hiding. That's when I thought of the radio. I had heard them talk about the food and about Baker. If those voices had used a hidden frequency once, maybe others did too. Maybe the right frequency would unlock what doors could not. I sat down, clipped the unit from my belt, and turned the dial slowly. Static came in waves. Sometimes it sounded like breathing. I adjusted the tuner with small, careful movements, my ears strained for any sign of a voice. As I kept turning the dial, the radio suddenly froze on a single frequency. A strange, high-pitched tone began to emit from the speaker, thin and sharp, like a whistle inside a metal chamber. My hand instinctively pulled back, but the sound held, vibrating through the room. Then the space around me shifted. A low vibration rippled through the air as if pressure had dropped. The metal floor warmed beneath my boots. I couldn't make sense of it. Then a sound came through the walls, a deep, warbling moan, something massive stirring beneath the platform. I stood up instinctively. The sound grew louder and the radio in my hand vibrated slightly. Then I felt it, a presence. The lights flickered once. My breathing stopped. It came from the direction of the shaft. Heavy air, like water displaced by something moving through it. I pressed myself to the wall. A shape appeared through the far window. At first, it seemed like a figure, but as it drew closer, it became something else entirely. Its form pulsed and shifted, soaked and glistening as if it had just risen from the depths. Long, thin arms hung low, fingers webbed and twitching. Along its limbs, patches of glistening skin opened and closed like gills, releasing thin streams of water that trailed behind it. Rows of small circular suction marks lined the underside of its arms, and the sides of its neck expanded with each slow breath. It was as if a deep-sea creature had taken on a partial human frame, a grotesque fusion of form built for movement through dark waters. Its chest rose and fell with a slow, fluid rhythm. The closer it came, the more I saw the water still trickling from its shoulders and spine, pooling at its feet in a small puddle. It had heard something. It was searching. For a moment, I thought it saw me. Its head tilted slightly, revealing a single reflective eye, too large for its face. I froze in place. My goggles were still on. It hovered in place, twitching slightly. It didn't move toward me or strike. It simply stayed there, studying. And in that moment, I understood something vital. Those goggles were not ordinary safety gear. They were a layer of defense, a shield. They kept me invisible to it. Whatever that thing was, it couldn't see me through the lenses. That rule on the list, the one about never taking them off, made sense now in a terrifyingly real way. Then, the radio crackled again. Instantly, the creature turned. its head snapping toward the sound. It began to drift forward, moving with a slow, controlled precision that betrayed its size. It moved toward the device in my hand. I understood then that it had locked onto the radio. I took a slow, cautious step backward, then another, my eyes fixed on the creature's reflective gaze. It didn't lose focus. It began to follow, its dripping form gliding forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. I continued to back away, one measured step at a time, until the edge of the platform came into view. The sea below lapped softly against the rig's supports. I watched the creature's head tilt slightly, its attention unwavering. The high-pitched tone still buzzed from the device in my hand. I raised the radio slightly, then, with precise timing, hurled it into the dark water below. The moment the splash echoed, the presence moved. It turned with fluid, silent grace and disappeared beneath the waves. I stood there, breathless. The rule had made sense now. Keep the radios on the same frequency, not to stop leaks, to stop calls. I leaned against the wall, shaking. They weren't hiding accidents. They were hiding something alive, and they were keeping us just alive enough to keep the rig running, risking our lives daily for profit. That was the truth. We were expendable as long as the work continued. And now I had seen what lay beneath our feet. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not yet. I wasn't sure I had the words, but I knew I couldn't carry this alone. I needed to find someone who had seen something, someone who had doubts like I did, someone who might have glimpsed what took Baker. As I replayed the scene in my head, a question settled deep inside me. Was that the same creature? The one that moved with wet, fluid grace, eyes reflecting unnatural light? Had I just witnessed the thing that dragged him down into the sea? So I started small. In the morning, I passed a worker in the supply corridor and asked him if he had ever seen anything strange near the lower decks. He didn't answer, just adjusted his grip on the crate and walked faster. Later, in the engine hall, I spotted two crewmen checking gauges. I approached casually, offered a nod, and asked about Baker. Their eyes narrowed slightly. One of them mumbled something about not being authorized to discuss assignments. Then they both turned their backs. I kept my distance, but followed the flow of movement. Tried again at lunch. No one made eye contact. I knew I had drawn attention to myself, but I needed answers. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, avoided deliberately. Still, a part of me clung to the thought that someone must know the truth. I had to keep looking. Then, late in the afternoon, I found myself in the central walkway alongside two other workers who had lingered after shift rotation. I asked them, directly this time, if they knew what the goggles were really for. Before they could even react, one of them stepped back and raised his hand. "Over here," he called. "We've got a breach." A voice barked from behind. 3 or more outside designated work zones is a breach. I turned to them in disbelief. "You really called them on me?" "I was just trying to talk," I said sharply, my voice low but laced with anger. Their expressions stayed blank. One avoided my eyes entirely. The other gave a subtle shrug, like it was nothing personal. 2 guards approached at a brisk pace. Their expressions didn't betray any emotion. They scanned our badges, confirmed our identities, and separated us without further explanation. "You've been warned," one said. I tried to protest, but they grabbed me by the arm and turned me down the side corridor. I didn't resist. There was no point. Within minutes, I was escorted to a small cell near the center shaft. 1 bed, 1 vent, a metal door. That was the moment I became certain that this place wasn't just operating like a prison. It truly was one. The lock clanked shut. There was no explanation or processing. Isolation. I sat on the edge of the bed, palms sweaty. This was no standard disciplinary action. It was complete containment. I'd asked the wrong questions. I'd stood too close. How could the thirst for profit justify risking every soul on this rig? How do you continue your day with something like that lurking beneath your feet? I'd reached toward something they wanted buried. and now they were showing me just how far they'd go to keep it that way. Time passed in a strange, windowless loop. I heard footsteps echo, doors creak, and water drip. But no one came, until a shadow passed between waking and dream, close and real. I saw it glide across the floor, stretching toward me. At first it was just motion, but then it came closer, deliberate steps, silent, unmistakable. Someone was outside. A figure moved into view, cloaked and slow, as if drawn forward by the dark. I sat up, tense. My eyes adjusted to the low light, and I saw the fabric of a hood, the glint of boots, and it was heading straight for my cell door. It was after lights out. The corridor outside was silent, save for the occasional knock of metal against metal. A figure appeared beyond the tiny glass slit, covered in a hood, face obscured. They knelt beside the door and leaned close. It wasn't a guard. It wasn't a creature. This was someone making a choice to be here, not someone sent. Whoever it was, they had come alone. "I saw you," he whispered. "At the archive room. I know what you're looking for." I stood up slowly, cautious. The figure remained crouched at the door, face hidden beneath the hood. My mind raced. Who was he? A worker like me? Someone with access? Or something else entirely? I searched for some detail, anything to anchor his presence to something real. Nothing came. "I can help you," he said. "I have access, but I need something in return." I stayed silent, unsure whether this was bait or a lifeline. Could I trust someone who approached in shadows and offered forbidden knowledge? Was this a trap set by the very people I was trying to expose? "You get the documents," he said, voice steady. "You take them off this rig. You tell people. Make them listen." My thoughts tumbled. If he was telling the truth, this could change everything. But if he wasn't, why? I finally asked. A long pause followed. Then came his answer. "Because I can't. But listen carefully. Tomorrow, after your shift, return to your quarters. Wait there. No matter what happens, they'll still assign you to work. That's your window." The moment hung in the air. Then he vanished from the slit of glass, his presence swallowed by silence. I heard his boots fade into the distance. The door stayed locked. I was left with a plan I hadn't expected, and a stranger I wasn't sure I could trust. But one thing was certain now. This had to be done. This prison, this hidden world under the guise of industry, needed to be known. Sleep never truly came to me that night. The metallic hum of the rig, the faint dripping sounds echoing from the pipes, and the replay of the creature's stare had all combined to create a sleepless fog in my mind. My limbs were heavy, and my thoughts scattered. As the morning light filtered in through the tiny grated vent, I was already awake, sitting upright, waiting. The door creaked open with a metallic groan, and a guard entered with a tray. He didn't say a word beyond what was necessary. "Eat! You're back on duty today." He handed me the tray, then placed a printed slip of paper on the metal desk beside the bed. My name was on it, followed by an alphanumeric location code. That was where I'd be stationed for the day. The moment he left, I forced myself to eat, barely tasting anything. I washed quickly, dressed, and fitted my goggles back over my eyes. As the lens locked into place, I couldn't help but remember the watery stare of that creature. These goggles had saved me once. They were the only shield I had. Work passed slowly. Every step I took, I felt the weight of eyes on me. Faces turned just slightly too late when I looked up. Conversations hushed. No one said anything directly, but it was obvious I had drawn unwanted attention. They all knew, or they had been told something about me. I kept my head down and finished my assigned task. The machinery I was checking made the same low groans as before, but everything now carried a sinister undertone. When the shift ended, I returned to my quarters in silence. I had no radio anymore. My only connection to this place had sunk into the ocean, and with it, any chance of listening in on hidden frequencies. I removed my gloves, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and leaned against the wall. Then, without warning, something slid under my door. A folded note. "Be ready. You'll hear a sound in 5 minutes." There was no signature, no further instruction, but I knew it was from him, the voice in the dark. I stared at the words until my heart began to race. 5 minutes. I checked the small analog clock on my wall and counted down silently. Just as the final seconds ticked by, a loud mechanical alarm began to sound. It wasn't the usual emergency drill or work shift siren. This one was distorted, irregular, and clearly unplanned. I opened the door and peeked out. People were running, shouting, clutching tools and helmets. Some guards barked orders. Lights flickered above. Smoke leaked from one of the side corridors. Then, from the left, a door creaked open and a hand shot out, grabbing my sleeve and pulling me inside with force. I stumbled, heart hammering, ready to fight whoever it was, but then I heard the voice. "You're late. We need to move." It was him, the hooded figure. The same voice from outside my cell. Still cloaked, still shadowed, but unmistakably calm in the chaos. He handed me a laminated card with an access chip embedded in it. "We're heading for the archive room," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Once we're in, I'll show you what they've been hiding. After that, make your way to the southwestern launch deck. Behind the crate lifts, there's a vertical storage shaft. Crawl space at the base, just enough to hide in. When the noise dies down and the alarms cut off, that's your moment. There should be a launch boat nearby. Take it. Get off this rig and don't look back." I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to know why he was helping me or who he really was, but he had already started moving. I followed. We passed through the lower corridors, weaving through maintenance routes that were temporarily unguarded thanks to the chaos he must have created. At last, we reached the archive level. The card beeped against the scanner and the door hissed open. Inside, rows of cabinets stretched along the walls. Dust-coated binders, labeled by year and sector, formed towering columns. He walked directly to one section marked Pelagos. He pulled out a thick, steel-bound folder and handed it to me. "Everything you need is in here," he said quietly, almost like a whisper meant only for me. His hand lingered for a moment, and in his voice I heard a kind of finality, as if this exchange marked the end of his purpose. "Keep it close. Don't stop for anything. Project Pelagos." The name alone made my stomach turn. We left in silence, the air between us tense and brittle. As we turned the corner, the metallic sheen of the corridor caught a streak of something dark and wet on the floor. I stepped closer and recognized it immediately, a deep, red smear, thick and clotted at the edges. Blood. It trailed along the floor in broken lines, vanishing under a doorframe. The rule came back to me like a whisper in my mind. Rule number 3. If you see blood, report it immediately. Do not touch it. My feet halted. The weight of the folder in my hands seemed heavier. The hooded man looked over his shoulder. Though most of his face was obscured, his expression remained unreadable. He didn't speak or offer any reassurance. He only gave a slight nod, the kind that implied urgency and expectation, as if telling me that this was the only option left. In that silent moment, I understood we had to keep moving. We stepped carefully around the stain. My chest tightened with guilt for not reporting it, but I knew we had no time. That stain served as more than a warning. It marked that whatever force maintained control over this place had already become aware that this place was already aware. And still, we moved forward. The hallway began to shift. Lights dimmed, and the pressure in the air grew dense and suffocating. From around the corner came the unmistakable, wet, dragging sound of something enormous moving with intent. My stomach knotted. I knew that sound. The memory of its form, the stench of seawater and decay, flooded back. This was not a new encounter. It was returning. The same creature I had seen before, the same presence that had haunted the dark edges of this place. My knees weakened and my breath quickened. I was terrified because I knew exactly what it was. I had seen it before. That memory was still vivid in my mind, and now it was happening again. The hooded man stopped, turned toward me, and pulled his goggles off slowly. "You need to run," he said. "Stick to the plan, do not turn back, no matter what happens." He raised both arms and began making loud, deliberate noise, banging against the metal railing beside us. I watched in disbelief as the creature responded, drawn directly to the sound. For a second, I thought he had lost his mind. Who would willingly summon that thing? But even through my fear, I couldn't ignore the steadiness in his actions. There was no hesitation, no sign of panic. As the creature rushed toward him, he didn't flinch. I was torn between horror and awe. He was giving me a chance, and I knew it. As terrified as I was, I found myself moving, driven by the silent demand of his sacrifice. Whatever madness he carried, it came with purpose. The man turned to me once more. "Go." I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the deck. Wind slammed into my face. The sea stretched into black nothingness. I ducked behind the crates near the lift and opened the Project Pelagos file. Pages fell into my lap, notes typed on thin old printer sheets, some of them water-stained, diagrams of the creature, maps of its known movement range, charts of sacrificial rituals encoded in corporate lingo, worker rosters, weekly candidate selection. The special meals were not celebrations, they were tools. The food was infused with suppressants to dull awareness, soften resolve, and make the chosen worker more compliant. Each week, someone vanished. The pattern wasn't random, it was calculated. Someone always disappeared after the meal. They were offered up. But this was never about the creature. Not entirely. It wasn't a cult or a sacred duty. This was about money. The rig's real mission was oil extraction. Massive profit. But deep below, where their drills pierced ancient trenches, they woke something. Something that would not allow them to continue unless it was fed. So they fed it. Sacrifices to protect the business. Human lives as payment of uninterrupted production. Every rule now revealed its true purpose. The goggles shielded you from the creature's gaze. The radios controlled the information flow. The rule about blood meant contamination, a sign of its proximity. The clock, when it ran backward, you had to hide. All of it was orchestrated, not to save lives, but to keep the operation alive. The rig was never meant to protect its workers. It was built to manage an ancient threat without slowing the flow of oil. My hands trembled as I clutched the documents. My breath hitched as the weight of their contents settled in my chest. These files were far beyond mere evidence. They had become my only lifeline. I folded them carefully and tucked them back into the folder, pressing it close to my chest. These pages had to reach land. The truth they carried could not die here. After what felt like an hour, the sirens fell silent. I crept from behind the crates, walked to the side rail, and located a secured emergency dinghy. The release system responded to the access card. I slid the boat into the water and climbed down the rope ladder with the folder strapped to my chest. The engine murmured beneath me as I kept the boat close to the rig's edge, threading my path through the shadows, navigating by the rhythm of swinging spotlights and the dark contours of the structure. The night air pressed in heavy and salty, thick with the tang of machinery and oil. Below, waves smacked against the hull in steady patterns, a lullaby that did nothing to calm the tension in my chest. Every foot I gained felt like a breath released. Distance meant safety, or at least the hope of it. The thought of the hooded man emerged again, unbidden. He had said escape wasn't an option for him. That admission clung to my mind like fog. Why? What had bound him here so permanently? What had he done or seen? The boat swayed with a sudden lift, a rolling swell shifting beneath the hull. I braced myself and scanned the dashboard. A small battered radio sat in the console's cradle. I reached for it, wiping seawater from the dial, and turned the knob slowly. Static cracked and whispered. I bypassed the rig's frequency, cautious not to alert anyone still monitoring. My fingers lingered over the dial. Then, slowly, I began to scan. frequency by frequency, praying to catch a sliver of life out there. Someone. Anyone. But then the water changed. The waves grew restless, their rhythm shattered, dissolving into a chaotic churn. My skin prickled as a low vibration crawled up through the floor of the boat. I turned my head slowly, heart thudding, and saw the sea swell in an unnatural shape. The sight was terrifying, but it wasn't unfamiliar. I had heard this rhythm before, had felt this pressure against my ribs. It was the same pulse I had known on the rig. This fear wasn't new. It was the echo of that creature's return, and this time, I was alone. Before a coherent thought could form, a massive force struck the side of the boat. A sudden impact had slammed into the side of the boat with brute force, unlike anything nature could explain. The vessel heaved sideways, pitching me into the air. My temple cracked against the metal edge as I was flung into the sea. A scream erupted from my lungs but was immediately silenced by the ocean's cold grasp. Water enveloped me, crushing and all-consuming. The folder was ripped from my arms. I reached for it, but it vanished in the darkness below. The surface above rippled like a distant dream, slipping farther away as I sank into blackness. The last thing I felt was the cold, crushing weight of the sea pressing in from all sides. I gasped for air, but my lungs filled with salt and panic. Then everything vanished. My vision collapsed inward, and I sank into unconsciousness. Darkness, then light. A glare stung my eyes as I blinked against it. Hands gripped my arms, dragging me across wet wood. Voices shouted over the hum of an engine and the slosh of waves. Coughs racked my chest as I heaved out seawater, gasping for air like it was the first breath of my life. I coughed up water and blinked against the sun. I was lying on a wooden deck, surrounded by men in heavy raincoats. "You all right, son?" A rough voice. Calloused hands. They were fishermen. They had found me floating near the shoals. I bolted upright, panic flooding me. "The folder," I said. "The papers." They exchanged confused glances. "We didn't see anything else," one said. "Just you, barely breathing." I collapsed back onto the deck, drenched and broken, salt water clinging to my skin like a second layer. The silence around me roared louder than the sea had. My arms felt hollow, my chest caved in. The folder, my only proof, my only hope, was gone. I had clung to those papers like a lifeline, believing they would change something, expose the horror, save someone. Now they were just ink dissolving into the ocean. Everything I had seen, everything I had endured and sacrificed to uncover, vanished beneath the waves. A sense of failure wrapped around me, tighter than the wet clothes on my back. I had nothing left but memory and the ache of knowing that truth had sunk before it could breathe. Weeks passed. I shared everything I had witnessed, from the rituals to the creature to the desperate escape. Each word felt heavier than the last, but my voice faltered under the weight of disbelief that met me. Without documents, without names or tangible proof, my story sounded like the ramblings of a man broken by the sea. The company issued an official statement. According to them, I had simply fallen overboard during routine maintenance. The rig had no record of anything unusual. My truth had been silenced beneath the official line. Then, one morning, while sipping coffee in a diner near the docks, I saw the headline on a small newspaper. "Rig worker Reed Smith found dead under mysterious circumstances. Family demands answers." I stared at the photo, numbness settling over me like a heavy tide. It was him. The hooded man who had led me through the shadows, who had risked everything to hand me the truth. Reed had guided me, protected me, and when it mattered most, he had given himself up so I could run. And now, he had been erased. His name reduced to a few lines in a local paper, his sacrifice swallowed by the same system he tried to fight. All we had done, all we had uncovered, everything we had lost, it had meant nothing. The rig was still running. The company still denying. The creature still lurking beneath the waves, fed by new workers unaware of the rules or their meaning. Every death, Every page of evidence, every moment of horror. Wasted. I folded the paper slowly, my hands trembling. My heart was heavier than it had ever been. Some truths weren't meant to be told. Some horrors sink into the sea and never rise again. The job listing said, Overnight Security Associate, Fulfillment Center, Fall River, Massachusetts. $15 an hour, plus a $1.50 shift differential for nights. I read it twice in the parking lot of the Brockton Econo Lodge, sitting in my car with the engine off because running it wasted gas. And then I clicked apply and set my phone face down on the passenger seat. Outside, the lot was half full. A woman in nursing scrubs was loading grocery bags into a Civic 2 spaces over. She glanced at me once, the casual sweep you do when you sense motion nearby, then went back to her bags. Nobody looked at me and saw a problem. That was the thing about civilian life I was still getting used to. People stopped caring what you were. I picked the phone back up and submitted the application. That was a Thursday. They called the following Monday, which I took as a sign of how badly they needed people rather than a sign of my qualifications. The woman on the phone was pleasant and quick. Orientation. Wednesday at 4 p.m, Fall River facility. I wrote the address on the back of a gas station receipt and taped it to the dashboard. I didn't tell anyone. There was nobody to tell. My brother was in Phoenix and we talked maybe twice a year. Sarah, my wife, separated, not yet legally finalized, had moved to her sister's place in Providence, and we coordinated through a calendar app. I had a box of books, and a box of kitchen stuff, and a box labeled Leo, M-I-S-C, in her handwriting, sitting in a hallway I hadn't yet found the nerve to visit. So the calendar stayed empty. I circled Wednesday on the free motel calendar by the door, and went back to watching cable news with the sound low and trying not to think too hard about the previous 11 months. The facility was bigger than I'd expected, which is saying something because I had expected large. I followed a service road off the highway exit for about a mile until the warehouse appeared on my right, low and wide across a flat clearing. It sat pushed back against an old tree line, dense, close-set growth, the kind of trees that have been standing a very long time. And even on a clear Wednesday afternoon, the forest edge looked dark. The parking lot alone was bigger than 3 football fields. The building was clad in pale gray metal siding with floodlights mounted every 30 feet along the roof line. Not yet on, but mounted the way things are mounted when the night shift depends on them. I parked in the visitor section and sat for a moment. The building hummed. I could feel it from inside the car, a low vibration rising up through the asphalt in the seat and settling in my chest. It wasn't unpleasant. It was mechanical and regular and asked nothing of you. I got out and went inside. The lobby was fluorescent and clean. A front desk attendant handed me a visitor badge and a form to sign and pointed to a row of chairs where 2 people were already waiting. A kid in his early 20s with a thin beard he was still hoping would fill in, and a woman in her mid-40s with a lunch bag on her lap and the expression of someone who had been through enough orientation sessions to stop finding them interesting. We nodded at each other and waited. At 4:15, a door to the interior opened. The man who came through it was around late 50s, solid in the way that suggests someone had been large once and the mass had simply organized itself differently over time. Close-cropped gray hair. A face that had the quality of old leather, not worn down but toughened. Dark gray uniform with a security patch on the chest and a radio on his hip. He moved through the lobby the way you move when you've walked the same floors for years and don't need to think about where your feet are going. His eyes found the 3 of us, counted, settled into neutral. "Orientation group?" he said. We said yes. "Silas Black, head of overnight security." No handshake. He said it like he was reading from a roster. "Follow me." The tour took close to an hour, and by the end of it, I had a reasonable mental map of the place. The facility ran on a numbered sector system, 1 through 8, arranged around a central conveyor spine that ran the length of the building. Above the main floor, a mezzanine catwalk extended from the north end to the south, running at about 30 feet up with a knee-high railing on the warehouse-facing side. Cameras were mounted every 30 feet along the ceiling trusses. The break room and security office sat near the lobby on the west side. The incinerator chute was on the east wall, behind the returns processing station. Black walked us through all of it and named things. Conveyor control panel, facilities use only. Camera feeds pull to office monitors, checked on each circuit. Break room, 15 minutes per shift, not including lunch. He said these things and kept moving. The kid asked if there was a vending machine. Black said yes. I was doing what I've always done in unfamiliar spaces, cataloging details without deciding to. Old cop habit, the exit locations, the angles the cameras covered and the spots they likely didn't. One section, Sector 4, northeast corner, where the overhead lighting was on a slightly different circuit. The color temperature running warmer and marginally dimmer than the rest of the floor, not enough to notice unless you were specifically looking. I was. After the tour, Black brought us back to the security office and gave each of us a laminated card, about the size of a playing card with text on one side. I took mine and caught the header. Overnight Protocol, Fall River FC. Below it, 5 numbered items in clean, small print. "Read those," Black said. "Know them." "What are they for?" the kid asked. Black looked at him for a beat. "This facility has some history with the land it's built on. The protocols keep things running smooth." The kid looked down and read the card. The woman put hers in her pocket. I turned mine over, found nothing on the back, and slipped it into my jacket. "Questions about the protocols?" Black asked. Silence. "Good." He passed out tax forms and badge paperwork, and we filled everything out at the table, and that was orientation. The kid and the woman left at 5:30. I lingered a moment checking my forms, and when I looked up, Black was watching me. "Prior work history says law enforcement," he said. "It does." "You'll want to investigate things," he said. Not a question. I didn't respond. That instinct is a liability here. This job is observation and compliance. You observe, you follow protocol, you call it in if something needs calling in. He held my gaze a moment. "That card matters. Read it before your first shift." I said I would. I drove back to Brockton. The card stayed in my jacket. The first week settled into a routine, and the routine was exactly what I'd been looking for. In at 10, out at 6. Black was always there when I arrived and still there when I left, and in between he moved through the building on a path I never quite tracked. The overnight crew was small. Denise ran the returns processing station on the east side from 10 to 4. Hector did maintenance rounds and worked with the quiet efficiency of someone entirely unbothered by the size or the dark. Terry worked the south dock, a broad, cheerful man whose laugh reached Sector 3 when something struck him funny, which happened often enough that after the second night it stopped startling me. Nobody mentioned the card, nobody pulled me aside with a look. The nights moved in long, quiet intervals, and I let them move through me. I developed a circuit by the third night. Security office north through sectors 1 to 6, then east to returns and the incinerator chute, then up to the mezzanine catwalk north to south, then down and back to the office. 40 minutes per pass. I did it twice a shift with a desk period between for the monitor review. The mezzanine I went through quickly. The catwalk itself was fine structurally, but the lighting up there broke around the overhead trusses into alternating bands of light and shadow, and the railing was low enough to make itself known to the back of your brain on each pass. Nothing specific, just the general unease that large heights and empty space produce in a quiet building at 2 a.m. I logged it as a quirk of the space and moved on each time. The card stayed in my pocket. I told myself I'd read it when I had a moment. Then I stopped thinking about it. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know the difference between a genuine operational directive and a hazing ritual new hires were given to see if they'd ask embarrassing questions. 5 strange rules on a laminated card felt like the latter. It felt like the kind of thing Silas Black used to take the measure of new people, to see who'd comply without asking why and who'd need managing. I wasn't going to be managed. I pocketed it and forgot it. The nights were quiet. I slept clean and flat when I got back to the motel, a dreamless sleep from 6 until noon, and for the first time in close to a year, I wasn't grinding my teeth or waking at 3 in the morning going over the evidence chain that ended my career. The routine was a container, and I was grateful for it. 8 days in, it was working. The 9th night started like all the others. I signed in at 10, nodded at Black, started my first circuit. Denise was at her station. I heard Hector's cart squeaking somewhere in the 4-5 corridor. Terry's laugh came rolling down from the south dock at 10:40. By midnight, I was back at the office reviewing the camera feeds with a cup of coffee I was pretending was better than it was, and everything on all 60 feeds looked exactly as it always did. Empty aisles, running belts, the mezzanine walkway empty and striped with shadow. At 1 a.m., I started the second circuit. I was passing through Sector 3 at 1:47 when the light changed. I stopped. Sector 4, the northeast corner, had gone wrong. It wasn't the normal dimness I'd cataloged in week 1. The overhead lights had shifted, or something had shifted beneath them, into a color that I can only call sickly. A dull, deep amber orange that was wrong before I could say why, the way you register the pressure drop before you consciously understand a storm is coming. The spaces between the shelving units in Sector 4 looked deeper than they should. The shadows at the back of the rows looked like they had distance in them, which doesn't make sense to write out, but that's what I saw. I stood at the line between Sector 3 and Sector 4. The hair on my arms was up. My hand went into my jacket pocket for my clipboard and found the laminated card. I pulled it out. Standing under the clean white lights of Sector 3, with the amber glow bleeding at the edge of my vision from the right, I read the card. I read it once fast and once slow. By the end of the second pass, my mouth was dry. They weren't hazing. I understood that immediately and without argument, standing there, with that wrongness in the air. They were specific in the way that only experience makes things specific. The way a veteran detective's notes are specific because someone had already been through it and survived and written down exactly what to do. These rules weren't written to test anyone. They were written because someone had needed them. I was still holding the card when the sound started. It came up through the floor first. That was the thing. Not through the air, but through the concrete itself. A slow, low vibration that had nothing in common with the conveyor hum. The conveyor hum was regular and bright and had rhythm. This was deeper than rhythm. It was a groan, steady and enormous, like something very old and very large, shifting weight it had been holding for a long time. It came from every surface at once, and from the center of the building, and it felt less like a sound and more like a change in pressure, the kind that builds behind your eyes when the elevation changes too fast. I looked at the conveyor line running through the gap between Sectors 3 and 4. I watched the belt. The packages were sliding the wrong way. I looked at the card. Rule 1. I looked in the direction of the sound, toward the deep amber dark at the heart of Sector 4. Toward wherever that groan was still rolling out of in long, slow waves. Here's what 11 years on the force does to you. You go toward the problem. Every reflex, every piece of training, every late night spent learning that the sound in the dark is information, and information is the only thing that keeps you and the people around you safe, all of it pointed in one direction. Forward. toward the noise, toward the dark with the wrong light in it, and the belts running backward, and the ancient weight moving in the bones of the building. I put the card back in my pocket. I walked toward the sound. The lights of Sector 3 stayed white behind me. Ahead, the amber dark of Sector 4 waited at the end of the aisle, and the groan moved through the floor under each step, slow and patient, like breathing. I was still a cop. That was the problem. I was still a cop, and somewhere ahead of me in the dark, something already knew it. Sector 4 smelled wrong before I saw anything. I noticed it 2 steps past the boundary line, a low, damp cold that had no business being in a climate-controlled building in June. Not the dry chill of an overworked AC unit. This was older. It hit the back of my throat with the quality of water that had been sitting in the dark a very long time. My grandmother had a root cellar under her house in Dorchester, and in summer it smelled of cold stone and standing water. This was worse than that. The root cellar smelled like earth. This smelled like something beneath the earth. The amber light was worse up close. From the Sector 3 border, it had looked like a circuit issue. Standing inside it, the color sat just outside comfortable, and the shadows between the shelving units were deeper than the fixtures could account for. I looked down the aisle. Packages in their normal configuration. Nothing moved. I kept walking toward the conveyor spine. The groan was still there, slower now, lower, like something that had been holding its breath had begun to exhale. At the end of the main corridor, I stopped and watched the sorter line. The packages were going the wrong way. Not jammed, not cycling from an error. Wrong way, smooth and steady, the belts pulling everything south to north in full reverse. It looked almost normal. The wrongness was only in the direction, and somehow that made it worse than any obvious malfunction. I was stepping back toward the break room when I saw the package. It was on the belt about 20 feet down, easy to pick out because it was dark. Wet. It left a smear on the belt surface as it slid past, and the moisture in the amber light looked almost black. The air around it was colder, a localized cold I felt drop by 10 degrees as it approached. I reached out and stopped it. The moment my hand touched it, I almost let go. Soaked through, heavy, the cardboard soft the way it gets after time underwater. The dark fluid on my palm was cold in a way that hurt, bone deep, like plunging your hand into ice water. And the smell hit me all at once. The same root cellar smell, but concentrated, like pressing your face to a drain. I turned it over. The label was dry and clearly printed. Everything else about the package was degraded, but the label was intact. Resident of the Deep. No address. No return address. No tracking barcode. My right hand moved toward the scanner on my belt. 11 years of evidence processing. You find a thing. You document the thing. My fingers were on the scanner handle before I caught myself. Rule 3. I held still. No scanning. No logging. The rule was telling me specifically not to do the one thing my entire career had trained me to do. I let go of the scanner. I turned east and started walking toward the incinerator chute. The cold from the package was spreading up my forearms. I kept my eyes level, not looking up at the mezzanine. 40 feet to the return station. I pushed through the gate and reached for the incinerator handle when my elbow caught the flashlight clip on my vest. The light came on and swung upward. It swept the mezzanine railing in one wide arc and held. Something was there. It was a face. Pale, leaning over the railing, looking down. The pale wasn't complexion, it was surface. The smooth, absolute surface of the inside of a shell. And where the eyes should have been, the skin simply continued, unbroken. No sockets, no features. A face assembled by something that understood what a face was supposed to look like from a description, but had never seen one. There was nothing to see with, and it was seeing me. I dropped the flashlight. The beam hit the floor sideways, and I was already moving, both hands back on the package, the last 15 feet to the incinerator door. I hit the handle, yanked it open, shoved the package in, slammed it shut. Both hands flat on the door, breathing. The cold was gone. Not gradually, between one breath and the next. The root cellar smell vanished completely. The groan in the floor faded back to the baseline conveyor hum. I stood there and counted my heartbeats to 30 before I turned around. The returns area was empty. The mezzanine above was dark and still. The flashlight was on the floor 6 feet away, still on, throwing a yellow circle on the concrete. I picked it up. I did not shine it upward. The security office was 10 by 12 with a desk, a chair, and the monitor bank, 8 screens running 12 camera feeds on rotation. I came in, shut the door, and sat down. My forearms were still cold where the package had pressed against them. The monitors cycled normally. Sectors 1 through 6, North Dock, South Dock, Mezzanine. I watched the mezzanine feed come up. The catwalk was empty. The lighting up there was normal. I looked at the wall clock. 2:58 a.m. The last rule: do not look into the security monitors after 3 a.m. I had 2 minutes. I watched the North Dock feed the way I used to watch security footage at a scene, systematically, professionally, looking for the shape I'd seen at the railing. The clock hit 3 a.m. I didn't look away. The monitors frosted over. It started at the bezels, a white, crystalline film growing inward, and the feeds disappeared one by one. Before the last screen went white, I saw the shapes in the frost weren't quite the warehouse, same geometry but stretched, distorted, like a reflection in water after a stone drops through it. Then I saw the figure in the glass panel above the monitor bank, the cable management cover, a reflection in it, a man standing behind my chair. Older, compact, in a flat-brimmed cap and brass-buttoned uniform, mid-century postal service. He was holding a bag that moved from the inside, something shifting slowly against the canvas. He raised one arm and pointed to his right. In the building's orientation, that meant south. South exit. Rule 4. I did not turn around. I said nothing. I watched him in the reflection and held still. The radio crackled. "Hey!" Terry's voice, stripped of his usual ease. "Hey, can someone—" "Mezzanine." Static swallowed the rest. I picked up the radio and started to respond and stopped. The voice changed. A woman's voice. Older. The specific cadence of someone I hadn't heard since a hospital room in 2021. My mother has been dead 5 years, and I know exactly what her voice sounds like, and this was it. The pitch, the pacing, the way her sentences always trailed off waiting for you to finish them. "Leo," she said, "just come up." I set the radio down. The voice shifted. Sarah. The slight roughness in her lower register, the particular way she said my name when she was being patient. "It's okay. Just come up to the mezzanine. I'm waiting." I gripped the edge of the desk with both hands. Every rational thought I had knew what this was. The card in my pocket, the rule, the clear mechanics of what the entity was doing, using voices it had learned from my 3 breaches, using them as a lure to walk me up those stairs. My body heard Sarah's voice and wanted to stand up. I held the desk and let the wanting move through me without acting on it. The radio said my name one more time in her voice and went quiet. I sat in the silence. The frost on the monitors had stopped spreading. In the reflection above the screens, the figure in the postal uniform was gone. Cap, bag, buttons, all of it. Behind my chair was empty floor. I let go of the desk. My hands had gone white at the knuckles. The clock read 3:04 a.m. 3 rules broken in 90 minutes. Rule 1 when I walked toward the sound instead of the break room. Rule 2 when the flashlight swept the mezzanine. Rule 5 when I kept watching the monitors past 3 a.m. I'd followed Rule 3 by about 4 seconds of pure reflex. Muscle memory had nearly beaten the protocol on that one. And Rule 4 I'd held, barely, by not turning around and not speaking. 3 breaches. The thing above me had used each one like a bearing, orienting toward me the way you triangulate a position from signal data. It had the shape of me now. It had my name in the voices of people I'd lost. 30 feet up in the dark of the mezzanine, something without eyes was waiting with complete patience because it had no particular relationship with time and no reason to hurry. I thought about the 3 guards before me. Black had said it without saying it. That card matters. He'd said it with the flatness of someone who had watched people ignore it before and had watched what came next, 3 times. 3 overnight guards who had not, in the end, survived the instruction to take it seriously. I'd treated it as hazing. I'd applied the framework that worked for 11 years. Assess the situation, identify the pattern, document, and report. Every single tool I had was wrong for this. Not the situation, not the entity. Me. My tools were wrong. I sat with that. Then I straightened up, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the top drawer. The emergency kit was where I'd seen it since my first week. A red plastic box with standard first responder contents, and along the back of the drawer, 4 road flares banded with a rubber band. I pulled them out and set them on the desk. Flares wouldn't do anything to the thing on the mezzanine directly. Nothing on the card suggested light repelled it. But light was real. Light was the physical insistence of the normal world operating on its normal terms, and whatever the logos was, it existed in the places the normal world left gaps. The flares were a last resort. I put 2 in my vest pocket and held 2. Then I looked at the frosted monitors and the silent radio and thought about what the remaining rules were actually telling me to do. Rule 4 was the one I'd just held by staying seated. The postal worker, the figure in the reflection, not a fix, a hold. It would need completing. Rule 1 was where everything had started to go wrong. 20 minutes in the break room. The card was specific about the time. Exactly 20 minutes, not 15, not 30. The specificity of a ritual, not the vagueness of a suggestion. I understood, sitting there, that I hadn't yet earned those 20 minutes. The sequence had to complete in order. There were things that needed to happen before the break room would mean anything. Going now would just be hiding. I stood up. I put the flashlight in my vest, off. I opened the office door and stepped out. The floor was loud, the full reverse of the conveyor system, the entire length of the facility, running a rhythm the building wasn't designed for. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes adjust. There was a figure standing between sectors 2 and 3, 60 feet away, flat-brimmed cap, brass buttons catching the amber light, the mailbag at his side moving slowly from within. I raised my right arm and pointed south. He held still for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the south wall, and between one step and the next, he was gone. Not around a corner, simply gone. The aisle empty. The conveyor belts ground to a halt. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard all night. I stood in the doorway and held still in that silence and understood that the worst of it was still ahead and that it was mine to walk into alone. I gripped the unlit flare in my right hand. Then I turned off the desk lamp behind me and started walking toward the mezzanine stairs. The radio on the desk was still. The frosted monitors glowed faint white in the empty office behind me. My footsteps on the concrete were the only sound left in the building. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a hazing ritual, and it wasn't a breakdown, and it wasn't the stress of 11 months catching up to me in the quiet of a large building at 3 a.m. This was a hunt, and I had just spent 90 minutes telling the hunter exactly where I was. The mezzanine stairs were a straight metal flight at the north end of the main floor, 12 steps up to a landing, and then the catwalk running south from there. I'd walked them twice per shift every night for 9 days without thinking about them. They were just part of the circuit, the same as every other section of the building. I stood at the bottom of them now and looked up. The strip lighting along the catwalk was running normally, same color temperature as the main floor, no amber, no dimming. It looked exactly the way it looked on every other night of my first week here. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. The normalcy of it felt deliberate, the way a room looks right before you realize something in it is wrong. I had the unlit flare in my right hand. The flashlight was back in my vest, off. Rule 2 was already broken. I'd done that in the returns area when my elbow caught the clip. Breaking it a second time wasn't going to change anything. I put my left hand on the railing and started up. The trick with the watch I'd learned in my 3rd year on the force from an older detective named Carver, who talked about procedure the way other people talked about weather, constantly and without prompting. He told me once that the crystal face of an analog watch made a crude mirror. Hold it at the right angle, and you could see around a door frame or a corner without putting your head past the edge. The reflection was small and curved, and you couldn't make out fine details, but you could see shapes and movement, which was usually all you needed. I'd used it maybe a dozen times over 11 years, mostly in building searches, usually in the dark. At the top of the stairs, I stopped and stood on the landing. The catwalk ran away from me in a straight line to the south wall, maybe 80 feet. The railing on the right side opened to the main floor, 30 feet below. I unstrapped the watch from my wrist, tilted it in my hand until I had the angle, and held it up at chest height to catch the reflection of the catwalk ahead of me. The image was small, a compressed strip of grating and railing curved at the edges from the crystal. I adjusted the angle slowly. I found the face about 40 feet down. It was crouched near the knee-high railing on the right side, folded in a way that made the joints look arranged differently than mine. The face was turned toward the stairs, toward me. That smooth, pale surface, the continuous unbroken skin over where eyes would sit, catching the strip lighting and giving back a flat white reflection with no depth in it. It wasn't moving. I kept still. I looked at the small, curved image and made myself breathe and think. It was near the railing. That railing ran the full length of the catwalk and mounted to the wall at the catwalk midpoint, roughly 45 feet from where I stood, was a red box I'd noted during the orientation tour and filed away without thinking about it again. Manual override for the fire suppression system. I'd seen the specs on a laminated sheet in the break room, the one on the wall next to the shift schedule that nobody reads. Total suppression in under 30 seconds from lever activation, chemical foam from the ceiling heads, full coverage. Whatever the logos was, it lived in the quiet and the dark and the spaces where the real world went soft and left gaps. A blast of foam and noise and cold water from every ceiling head at once was the opposite of that. It was the ward made into a weapon. The panel was 45 feet down the catwalk. The entity was crouched 5 feet past it, between the panel and the south wall. I started moving, watch held at chest height, eyes on the small, curved reflection, not looking directly at the thing, not looking at the railing, not raising the flashlight. Just the image in the crystal and my footsteps on the metal grating, which were louder than I wanted, but there was nothing to be done about that. 20 feet in, the cold started. It was different from the cold of the package, broader, a general drop in the air temperature that came with proximity to the thing rather than to what it had touched. The root cellar smell came in a few steps after, faint at first and then stronger, that specific ancient standing water smell I now recognized without needing to think about what it meant. It had known I was here since the stairs. It was patient in a way that had nothing to do with willpower. In the watch reflection, I saw it shift. Not stand. Adjust. The posture changed, the folded shape against the railing realigning, the head moving fractionally toward me, the smooth surface catching the strip light at a new angle. 30 feet in. The panel was 15 feet ahead. The thing was 25 feet beyond it. I was closing the distance, and it was tracking me without moving, orienting in the way a predator orients when it knows the prey is coming and sees no reason to hurry. I thought about the voices on the radio, my mother's voice, Sarah's voice, each one accurate enough that for one moment, just one, my body had believed it. It had spent my 3 breaches learning the shape of me, what I cared about, what I was afraid of losing. The entity was a good hunter. I could acknowledge that without letting it mean anything. 15 feet to the panel. The cold was working into my hands now, slowing my fingers, putting my thinking slightly behind. I kept the watch angled and kept walking. Then it moved, sideways, along the railing. The motion had a quality I can only describe as approximate, like watching something that understood movement from the outside, but hadn't had enough practice to make it look easy. It slid 3 feet and stopped, positioning itself directly adjacent to the red panel on the wall. I stopped too. 10 feet of catwalk between me and the panel. The entity at the railing 5 feet past it. The strip lighting ran between us, steady and fluorescent and completely indifferent to the situation. In the watch crystal, the face was clear now. The smooth brow, the unbroken skin where eyes should be, the lower half equally featureless where a mouth would be. The proportions were almost right. It had the measurements of a human head. But it was like a thing made from a description by someone who had never actually seen a face. And the wrongness of it was in the precision, how close it was to being correct, and how completely it wasn't. The lower surface moved. The skin shifted, folded, and the sound that came out wasn't a voice and wasn't mechanical noise. It was the groan. The same subsonic rumble I'd been feeling in the floor since 1:47 a.m., but coming from the face now, directed at me, pressing against my chest like a hand laid flat over my sternum. I took 1 step back. It slid 1 step forward, toward the panel. I understood. It was cutting off my route to the override. It didn't need to chase me. It needed me to not reach that lever. Hurting. An ambush predator that had shifted tactics when the ambush didn't work. I stopped moving back. I looked at the watch reflection one last time and fixed the position. Red box, wall-mounted, hinged cover, single pull lever. 2 seconds if I moved fast and didn't stop. I put the watch in my pocket. I kept my eyes on the catwalk grating under my feet, and I moved. Not looking up, not looking right. The pale shape, a presence in my peripheral vision at the railing, acknowledged, not engaged. Eyes on the metal grid, counting my steps because I had the distance. 5, 6, 7. The cold hit me like stepping into a freezer. The smell was thick. At my right shoulder, something was there, not touching me, present in that way you feel a person standing too close, a displacement, the edge of a presence your body registers before your brain catches up. 8 steps. My left hand hit the wall. I slid it sideways along the surface and found the raised lip of the panel housing. It was right there. Right shoulder. Inches. Not touching me. I don't know what kept it from touching. Maybe it needed me to look at it first, to acknowledge it directly the way I'd acknowledged the radio by picking it up, the way looking into the monitors at 3 a.m. had given it a line back to me. Maybe the eyes on the floor were a refusal it couldn't breach without my cooperation. Whatever the reason, it stayed at my shoulder, and the groan from it was building, pressing harder, and in that groan, I could hear something trying to form that was not my mother's voice and not Sarah's. The sound the Logos made before it borrowed someone else's voice. What it sounded like was the building itself, in low, continuous pain. I flipped the panel cover. The hinged metal swung up. My hand found the lever. I pulled it. The ceiling came apart. Every suppression head in the mezzanine section fired at once, and the foam came down in a white wall, high pressure, the roar of it swallowing everything in an instant. Not a sound, a percussion. It hit me in the chest, and the ears simultaneously. The chemical foam was colder than the water, colder than the cold of the entity's presence, and within 2 seconds, I was soaked through to the skin and completely blind, the foam filling my vision and running into my collar. Then the pain. Behind my eyes and at the base of my skull, at the place where the spine meets the brain. Not the pain of an injury, the pain of a frequency the human body was not built to receive. A silent shriek, 2 seconds long, directed. It had no volume because it had no sound. It was purely pressure, purely wrong, and then it stopped as completely as it had started. I was on my knees on the wet metal grating, both hands over my ears, which did nothing because the sound had been internal. I stayed that way for a moment. Then I took my hands down, opened my eyes, and looked. Foam everywhere. White and dense on the railing and the grating and the wall. The strip lighting still on, filtered now through haze, casting everything in a washed-out white. To my right, the railing section was empty. No shape crouched against it. No pale, smooth surface. The cold was gone. The ancient water smell was gone. What was left was the ordinary cold of wet clothes and air conditioning and industrial foam, which is a completely normal and manageable kind of cold. I sat on the wet catwalk for a minute and let the shaking in my hands run its course. It took about 60 seconds. Then I stood up, found the wall, followed it to the stair housing, and came down one step at a time to the main floor. The conveyor belts were still. The amber in Sector 4 was gone. The overhead lights ran white and even. The building sounded like it was supposed to sound. The hum, the baseline mechanical breathing of a functioning facility. I walked to the break room. The clock on the wall said 3:41 a.m. I sat in the chair closest to the door and laid my hands flat on the table in front of me and looked at the clock face. Rule 1. Break room for exactly 20 minutes. I'd broken it first, back at the start of all of this, when I'd walked toward the sound at 1:47 a.m. instead of here. But the break room was the end of the sequence, the ritual parameter that closed the loop. Not a punishment, and not a hiding place. A deliberate disruption of the thing's hunting cycle, a formal statement made with time instead of words. 20 minutes of absence, exact, after everything else had been addressed. That was the ritual. I was at the end of it now. I watched the second hand on the clock. 3 minutes in, my hand stopped shaking. 7 minutes in, the pressure behind my eyes was gone. 12 minutes in, the conveyor hum came back, the normal forward rhythm, the one I'd spent a week learning to stop consciously hearing. It had come back at some point, and it sounded exactly as it was supposed to. 15 minutes in, I thought about Sarah. Not the voice. The actual Sarah. The one whose handwriting was on a cardboard box in a hallway in Providence that I hadn't found the nerve to go pick up. I thought about her for maybe half a minute. Then I let the thought settle and went back to watching the clock. 20 minutes. I stood up. I pushed the chair in. I walked to the door and out onto the main floor. The warehouse hummed. The belts ran forward. The lights were white across all 8 sectors, and nothing moved in the shadows between the shelving units, except my own reflection in a Sector 2 safety mirror as I walked past it. Back in the office, I sat down and looked at the monitors. The frost was gone, every feed cycling normally. The mezzanine camera showed the catwalk coated in foam, suppression heads still dripping, railing empty and wet. Everything as it should be. I took the laminated card from my jacket pocket, damp from the foam. I read all 5 rules beginning to end. Then I took the blank notepad from the top drawer and wrote out all 5 rules from memory. 1 per line, neat and legible, and checked them against the card. I had them right. I closed the notepad and put it in my vest pocket next to the 2 unused flares. The night had 3 hours left in it. I picked up my clipboard and started my 3rd circuit of the building, walking the long empty aisles. The hum was just the hum. The shadows were just the shadows. For now. The last 3 hours of the shift were quiet. I did a 3rd circuit and then a 4th, which I hadn't done before. The routine was 2 per shift, but the routine had been built by a man who didn't know what was in the building. I knew now. I walked all 4, moving through each sector in sequence, checking the things I was supposed to check, marking the clipboard at each station. The conveyor belts ran forward the whole time. The lights stayed white across all 8 sectors. Sector 4 was the same marginally warm dimness it always was on a normal night. Nothing more, nothing different. I noted that on the clipboard anyway, because noting things was the reflex I had, and I saw no reason to stop it. At 4:15, I checked the incinerator chute. The indicator light on the housing showed the interior was still above operating temperature. The package had burned completely. No residue. I stood at the door with my hand on the housing for a moment, and then moved on. At 4:30, I passed the return station. Denise had left at 4, same as every night, her workstation powered down and coat hook empty. At 4:45, the south dock was locked and dark. Terry gone at the same time as Denise. Everything where it was supposed to be. Nothing that shouldn't be there. By 5:30, I was at the security office desk, filling in the night's incident report. I sat with the pen over the form for a while before I started writing anything. The form wanted incident type, location, time, description, action taken. I thought about what was true and what was technically true, and where the line between those two things sat on a document going into a facility records file. Then I wrote, mezzanine level fire suppression system was activated at approximately 0330 hours due to sensor anomaly. System performed as designed. No personnel were present in the affected zone at time of activation. Mezzanine catwalk and suppression heads require inspection and cleaning before the next operational cycle. Recommend facilities team review prior to day shift. All of it was technically true. I signed it, dated it, and put it in the night report slot. The notepad I'd started during the shift was still in the desk drawer, the blank one I'd used to write out the 5 rules from memory and check them against the card. I folded it and put it in my vest pocket next to the 2 road flares I hadn't needed. The laminated card went back in my jacket pocket, warped and slightly stiff from the foam, but still legible. At some point, I made a cup of coffee from the break room machine and came back to the desk and sat and drank it and waited for the clock to reach 6. I watched the monitor feeds cycle through their 2-minute rotation. The mezzanine feed showed the catwalk coated in foam residue, suppression heads still dripping, railing empty. Everything as it should be. I went out through the north dock door at 5:55. The overnight staff used the lobby entrance, but I wanted to be outside and sitting, and the dock steps were there. A short concrete flight from the dock door to the service road, facing east toward the old tree line. The same dense, close-set growth I'd noticed the first day when I'd pulled off the service road and sat in my car and felt the building hum through the seat. It looked the same now as it had then. Whatever had happened inside the building over the last 4 hours, the trees were exactly the same trees. I sat on the top step with my damp clothes starting to stiffen as they dried, and my arms resting on my knees. The sky was doing what it does in early June at that hour. Dark blue, giving way to gray, giving way to the pale color that isn't night, but isn't quite dawn either. The light coming up from behind the trees in flat, colorless bands. For the first time in 11 months, the evidence locker wasn't running in the back of my head. The internal affairs review, the resignation letter, the drive to Brockton with 2 boxes in my trunk. Those things were still true, still the shape of my life as it was now. But they were sitting somewhere behind me in the quiet, and I was looking at the tree line instead of turning to look at them. At 5:58, I heard a car on the gravel. A door. Footsteps that came past me without stopping and went through the dock door into the building. I stayed on the steps. Silas Black was inside for about 4 minutes. Then the door opened, and he came out and stood at the top of the steps. He didn't sit. He stood the way he always stood, like a man who'd made a decision long ago not to fully settle into any place. "Incinerator's still hot," he said. "I used it," I said. He came down 1 step. "Mezzanine's going to need work. Suppression system triggered. Sensor anomaly. It's in the report." He was quiet for a moment. I kept my eyes on the tree line. "Mezzanine suppression is on a separate trigger circuit from the main sensors," he said. "Sensor anomalies don't activate it. Manual does." I didn't say anything to that. He held out his hand. I reached into my jacket and took out the laminated card. Warped, dried foam across the bottom third. Text still clear on both passes. I put it in his hand. He looked at it for a moment, then closed his fingers around it and put it in his own jacket. "How many did you break?" he said. "3. Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 5. He nodded. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. The flat registration of a fact. "3, he said, "and you're sitting here. Rule 3 I followed. Rule 4 I held in the office and completed on the floor. I pointed south. He left. The belt stopped." Black looked at the tree line for a long moment. The light was coming up properly now, the flat gray giving way to pale yellow at the eastern edge where the sun was starting to clear the treetops. "You did better than the last 3, he said. I'd been thinking about the last 3 since 3:04 a.m. 3 overnight guards before me. 3 people who had received the same card and had not, at the end of their respective nights, been sitting on dock steps watching June light come up between trees. I'd thought about them in the break room counting the second hand. I'd thought about them on the 3rd circuit and the 4th. I hadn't reached any conclusions. Just carried the number the way you carry a number when it has people attached to it. "How many did they break?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he said. "They broke enough." He didn't say anything else about them. I didn't push. Somewhere out on the highway a truck passed, its sound traveling clear and flat across the morning air before fading. 3, I said. And it still worked out. Black turned his head and looked at me. Not the flat tally from orientation night, something with more weight in it. The look of a man who has been watching for a particular result and is trying to confirm he's seeing it. "This time," he said. The 2 words settled in the air between us, and I let them settle. I understood what they meant. The entity wasn't gone. The suppression system had severed its hold on this particular night, disrupted the specific configuration I'd created with 3 breaches in 90 minutes. The ward restored, the hunting cycle broken, the thing back in the deep shadows where it lived when it wasn't active. But next week the building would still be here. The mezzanine would be cleaned and inspected, and the catwalk would go back to looking the way it always looked. The thing would still be there in the negative space between defined places, the same as it had always been. It was eternal. Black had been doing this for years. The last 3 guards were gone. This was one night of something that didn't end. "This time," I said. He nodded and looked back at the tree line. We sat in the growing light for a while without talking. Somewhere in the main lot, the first day shift cars were starting to pull in. At 6:10, Black stood up from the step and went back inside without another word. He'd said what needed saying. I stayed on the steps for another 20 minutes. I kept the job. Not because I lacked options, but because I understood now what the job actually was. The laminated card was not hazing, and not a test, and not corporate policy. It was a set of protocols a building required to function as a building instead of something else, and someone needed to be here overnight to follow them, and that someone needed to understand what they were following them for. I bought a composition notebook from a Brockton drugstore the next day. 5 rules on the first page in clean block letters. A blank second page. The 3rd page was the beginning of a running log. Date, shift, observations, conveyor status, package labels checked, Sector 4 condition, mezzanine. Case file format, because case files were the language I thought in and the tool wasn't the problem, only the assumptions I'd been applying it to. I came in 30 minutes early each night. I read the rules from the notebook's first page before each shift. Not because I didn't know them, I had them memorized front to back within a week of that night, but because the reading was part of the preparation. The same way you check your gear before going in regardless of how many times you've done it before. The act of checking has its own value, separate from whether you'd have remembered without it. The nights were quiet, not empty. The building was never actually empty, and I knew now what occupied the parts of it I couldn't see. The quiet of a normal night was the quiet of the ward holding, the thing in the deep shadows kept in the deep shadows by routine and protocol, and the simple fact of a human presence moving through the building with its eyes forward and its hands doing what they were supposed to do. I'd learned to read that quiet the way you learn to read any place you've spent enough time in, as a language with its own texture and vocabulary. In August, I moved out of the Brockton Motel, found a one-bedroom in Fall River, 7 minutes from the facility. The boxes from Sarah's sister's place in Providence came with me in 2 trips. I unpacked them over a weekend, put the books on shelves and the kitchen things in cabinets. The box labeled Leo, Am-esque in Sarah's handwriting, I opened on a Sunday afternoon. A coffee mug I'd had since college, some photographs, a Bruins pennant I'd forgotten I owned. I put them all away in their places without making too much of it. I called Sarah in September, not about the boxes, just a call. We talked for about 20 minutes, and it wasn't what it used to be, and wasn't supposed to be. When we hung up, I sat on the couch in the Fall River apartment and felt the specific shape of what was gone, and let it be the shape it was without trying to make it anything different. Then I went to work. Terry still laughed too loud from the South Dock. Denise still left at 4 on the dot. Hector moved through the building on his rounds with the same quiet efficiency he'd had since my first night. Black was always there when I arrived and still there when I left, and I understood by now that this wasn't about shift coverage. The building was the shape his life had taken around itself over the years, the same way it was becoming the shape of mine. There was a loneliness in that which I recognized from the inside and didn't try to name out loud. Some things are understood without needing to be said. One night in October, I came down from the mezzanine and was halfway across the main floor before I realized I hadn't thought about anything except the circuit the whole time I was up there. Not the railing, not the watch trick, not the pale, smooth surface I'd seen 40 feet down the catwalk on the 9th night. Just the handrail and the grating under my feet and the view of the main floor through the railing gaps and the routine carrying me forward. I stopped in Sector 3 and noticed that and let it register. Then I kept walking. I passed the mezzanine stairs on the next circuit and didn't look up, not from fear, but because looking every time would mean it was always an event, and it wasn't an event anymore. It was the stairs. I passed the monitor bank near the lobby on my return and didn't glance at it because I'd reviewed the feeds from the desk at 11:30 and they'd been clean, and I'd noted that and moved on. The building hummed. The belts ran forward. Sector 4 burned white with the rest of the floor. Somewhere in the deep shadows between the shelving units, in the negative space where the light didn't quite reach, and the camera housings had their blind angles, and the hum of the machinery was a fraction off its usual pitch. Something old and patient and hungry sat in the dark, the way it had sat since before this building was built, and would sit long after the last conveyor belt rusted through. And I walked my beat, and I checked my labels, and I kept the ward whole, and the building kept running. That was enough. For now, it was enough.